Good evening and welcome to The Proof Is Out There. The U.S. military has had some now famous encounters with UFOs in recent years, but it may not be alone. Back in the final years of the Cold War, an encounter in the skies over the Low Countries of northwestern Europe prompted a robust military response. That sparked a controversy over what really happened, which continues to this day. It's March 1990 over the Belgian countryside. Two F-16s are deployed by the Belgian Air Force after radar spots an ominous object hovering in the air. They see this. You're looking at an actual recording of what was on their flight radar lock-on. In the center of the screen, at an altitude of 7,000 feet, is a diamond-shaped blip. This blip indicates there's something solid in the sky, though it doesn't necessarily represent what this solid object actually looks like. The radar's altimeter, measuring in thousands, indicates the odd object races thousands of feet higher, then plummets back down again at breakneck speed. And it seems to accelerate to 990 knots, or more than 1,000 miles per hour, before bolting out of range. The pilots never make visual contact, but back on the ground, one resident of Brussels claims to capture this footage of three lights in a triangular pattern passing overhead.
This video was shot in March of 1990 over Belgium on the same night of the radar sighting.
A few months later, Belgian Air Force Colonel Wilfred de Brouwer holds a press conference about the incident.
What these pilots detected was well outside the normal flying envelope of an airplane. Sometimes it had speeds between 150 knots till 990 knots, an acceleration which occurred in a few seconds. These speeds would be impossible to tolerate for a human being.
And there's another layer to this story. This wasn't the first Belgian sighting. There'd been a string of strange encounters just months before.
It starts in November of 1989. Multiple reports start coming in of seeing three lights in the sky.
During that first wave of sightings, no less than 30 different groups of witnesses described seeing three bright lights up in the sky.
What they see is that these aren't three distinct lights, but rather 3 points of light on one very large triangular-shaped object.
The witnesses claim to have seen the object slowly glide at low altitude northeast across the Belgian landscape from the town of Liège to the border with the Netherlands and Germany. More than half a dozen police officers working that evening also spotted the mystery aircraft. But it wasn't until months later, when the Air Force picked up that strange UFO on radar and this footage was captured, that they seemingly had proof that this was a technologically amazing craft.
There was nothing that existed that could outperform this F-16 aircraft. But the pilot says that as he's pursuing this object, the object makes essentially a quick turn and deviates off his radar system, and he loses it.
In total, this Belgian triangle was seen by more than 1,000 witnesses over these several months. With so many viewers and the military involved, could this be the real deal? Our experts try to identify both the object on radar and the one that was filmed. Are they one and the same? If so, what could it be? First, astronomer Mark D'Antonio examines the 1990 video.
The important thing here is to notice that there are three objects in the view, and the objects don't get any closer to each other or move apart from each other. They stay near each other, almost as if they're connected in some way through a structure. So we're probably looking at a cohesive, singular object that has lights on it.
So could this be a real triangular UFO? D'Antonio says he's not so sure.
I can never pronounce that this is real. There's no data indicating that it is. I can only say that it's compelling. From my point of view, the jury is still out. So does that make it a hoax? No. Does it make it real? No. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this footage exists of an F-16 Fighting Falcon tracking an object on its radar.
Sources say the ground footage was filmed at around 2:20 a.m., about 2 hours after the F-16 spotted something on their radar. So could these two incidents be connected? And what would that mean? Aviation expert Tim McMillan takes a closer look at that radar data.
What this radar screen is telling us is that essentially this object descended from 10,000 feet to roughly 500 feet or below in just a matter of seconds. To do that, we're talking about something that would have to be moving exceptionally fast, upwards of Mach 40. Those types of G-forces would crush a person.
So, McMillan agrees with the Belgian Air Force. A human couldn't withstand these forces, but maybe an alien could. Well, hang on. McMillan has a different theory as to what the F-16's radar screens may have detected.
I think possibly what we're looking at here is something called Bragg scattering. It's a scattering effect with the radar. Pockets of high humidity, ice crystals, cloud cover, different things like that can actually cause the radar to produce false echo returns. The pilots themselves never visually saw anything. Only the radar. In this particular case, I would say that the idea that radar scattering caused these false returns could be a very plausible explanation for it.
But remember, this object was detected on multiple radar systems, so it's unlikely it would be Bragg's scattering in every case. That's why many who've studied this incident remain perplexed. Okay, it's true. The incredibly fast speeds caught on the F-16's radar could be a glitch. But our verdict is genuine UFO. We have no way of confirming if the object seen on radar is the same one filmed in Brussels, but it does seem remarkable that these two pieces of footage came within hours of each other. And decades later, the former Air Force colonel and now retired Major General de Brouwer still can't account for the thousands of UFO sightings reported in Belgium over those months. Now from the sky to the earth. We are all familiar with sinkholes. Those happen when water moves through cracks underground, creating a void into which the surface eventually collapses. But is the opposite possible? Can the earth suddenly rise up? It's July 2021 in Haryana, India. Powerful rains have just swept through the area, inundating the surrounding field. But when a group of locals go to inspect the state of the land, they witness something astonishing. Their video shows that muddied water has pooled on top of the soil. Then suddenly, land starts surging up from below the surface. At first, it seems that the water might just be receding, but take a closer look. You can see that the land is actually rising as the water level remains the same on the ground. The person filming and the other bystanders have to step behind the cover of trees to get out of the way of this newly risen mass.
Initially, this looks like a landslide, but it's not sliding anywhere, it's rising. We've all seen the tide rise, but seeing the land rise, that's a rare thing.
Yet there is historical precedent for this kind of thing.
The most famous incident occurred in Mexico. In 1943, the Paricutin volcano rose out of nowhere, giving scientists sort of this opportunity to watch a volcano literally be born in real time. It's even considered one of the 7 natural wonders of the world.
The Paricutin volcano's cone rose about 1,500 feet in its first year. But notice that here, we don't see any typical signs of an eruption. So what else might be the cause? Could it be a methane bubble? A huge bubble of gas that can rise up from undersea methane deposits? Some have theorized that if a ship gets caught up near a certain part of the bubble, it can get pulled underwater and sink. They believe this could be the cause of many of the mysterious shipwrecks that have plagued the Bermuda Triangle.
A lot of people speculate that perhaps something could be causing this new landmass to essentially be pushed up from the water.
Methane bubbles have also been popping up in places like Siberia, where the region's permafrost is beginning to thaw. In some cases, this has resulted in huge gas explosions that leave massive, mysterious craters, as we showed you in a previous story. So could a buildup of gas or magma be causing this Indian land surge? We turn to our experts to get properly grounded. First, our experts don't see signs of volcanic activity, but is this seismic activity that happens when there is sudden rapid movement along faults in the earth, resulting in earthquakes.
If this is some kind of an earth movement, let's say an earthquake, well, then you're basically standing on a fault line. It would be shaking and opening up the land underneath it. The water itself would go down into that hole, and you see no motion of water other than the water coming up. And so this is a very unique phenomenon that I have not seen before.
So if it's neither a volcano nor an earthquake, could gas be behind this?
If this was a huge methane leak, they would be trying to breathe because this is a massive amount of gas that had to rise this thing up. Methane would be in this entire area. And so the people standing nearby would be running to get out of the way because that gas could kill them.
So then what could be going on here? Anderson thinks it has to do with something in the soil.
So when you look at this, you find out that there's a lot of clay in here that can absorb water, but that still doesn't explain why it rose so quickly. And then you found out that a farmer added a filler in there, and that filler was extra parts of rice.
The ashes of the hard covering of rice, known as rice hulls, are used as compost to improve soil quality and crop yield, since the carbon in them helps retain water and nutrients. In this case, as the floodwaters saturated the clay, the rice filler became buoyant and began to rapidly rise, creating an effect like a sponge filling with water. Our verdict? This was probably caused by the expansion of clay accelerated by rice filler. But there's no way to know for certain without testing the soil. With a video so strange, it had even our NASA geologist scratching his head, there's a chance what's going on is something we've never even heard of. The Patterson-Gimlin film is heralded as the best video evidence we have of Bigfoot. Well, many consider this next video to be just as intriguing and even more mysterious. See for yourself. Several years ago, this video started to circle around the internet. Its location and creator are still unknown to this day, although rumors suggest this was filmed on the 4th of July. And as you can see for yourself, the terrain is consistent with summertime in North America. Then this. The camera settles on something moving, emerging from behind a large boulder. It's hulking, covered in fur, and hustling along amongst the foliage. For a moment, we lose sight of the creature, but then it reappears, and it's not alone. The Sasquatch is carrying what looks like one of its offspring. The potential mama Bigfoot then sprints off into the distance. Field researcher Cliff Barrickman says most of the fanfare surrounding the so-called Independence Day video is due to its incredibly rare glimpse at a supposed Sasquatch child.
One of the biggest misconceptions about Bigfoot is that Bigfoot is an individual animal and he has been seen from Northern California to Florida to Alaska. But it turns out Sasquatches are a perfectly normal species of animal. They have offspring.
Back in 1924, a 64-year-old lumberman named Albert Ostman claimed he had been kidnapped by a Sasquatch and brought back to its cave, where he encountered an entire family of the creatures. He described them as a basic nuclear family, a father, mother, son, and daughter Sasquatch, who held him prisoner for more than a week until he was able to escape.
Sasquatches do have babies. There are a number of Sasquatch footprint casts of juveniles, so one would expect occasionally, every blue moon, that some footage would show one of those offspring.
Ostman's story reflects an idea that many Bigfoot researchers share, that caves make a perfect home for Bigfoot. You can even visit a privately owned cave system in British Columbia that's near many Sasquatch sightings, but you have to sign a waiver before entering, just in case you have a run-in with the beast. But let's see what our experts think about this Sasquatch sighting. Bigfoot investigator Steve Cole tries to pinpoint the origin of this Sasquatch family film.
I did run the bird noises going on in the background.
Coles identified that call as that of the olive-sided flycatcher, native to the western U.S.
Besides the bird song you hear in there, you hear a car in the background. So to me, it's not a very remote location.
It's not a disqualifier since Bigfoots have allegedly been seen on roads, but Culls sees other red flags.
I immediately saw that there was something wrong with the way the body mechanics of the creature's movement. The Bigfoot itself just kind of just runs, stops, runs, stops, runs, stops. Find that very peculiar behavior.
We checked with biologist Floyd Hayes to see if he saw any signs of familial great ape behavior.
Usually when monkeys carry an infant, the infant is either hanging on to its belly underneath or it's climbed up on top of its back. They don't walk two-legged carrying it like that.
But even if you accept Bigfoots are a different kind of ape, closer to a person in how they walk or carry their young, anatomist and Bigfoot expert Jeffrey Meldrum says there's another obvious flaw.
I was troubled by what appeared to be the stiffness of the infant, as if someone in a costume was carrying a doll that didn't have mass and animation. There's some remarkably lifelike dolls out there, including some very lifelike Sasquatch infant dolls.
We're calling this video a hoax, even though it's touted as one of the best. Our experts remain unconvinced that this is anything but a person in a well-made costume holding some sort of doll. But don't lose hope. An increasing number of reports suggest there are still plenty of little Bigfoots out there waiting to be found. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung famously asked why, with so many UFO sightings, we lack solid photographic evidence of their existence. Is it because UFOs aren't photogenic? Well, this next snapshot might be the photo that proves 50 sightings. Fife, Alabama, 1991. Documentary filmmaker Ted Oliphant is in town to investigate a string of UFO sightings when he receives an anonymous gift. It's a Polaroid photograph. That Polaroid, kids, that's what we did for instant photos before smartphones, appears to show a flying saucer hovering in front of a fuzzy tree line and a distant mountain range. Now, the UFO itself looks like a ridged disc with a clear dome on top and a flat underside facing the photographer. Many allege it's a photo taken during the famous 1989 UFO wave that drew Ted to Fife in the first place. That original UFO wave kicked off 2 years earlier. In February 1989, multiple police officers respond to reports of a large, bright, and silent object in the sky. Then they claim to see it themselves, first on a local hilltop, then later by the side of a road.
This time, it's moving right towards them, and it would be the same size as a beach ball at arm's length. So we're dealing with a massive, massive object.
The UFO silently passes overhead and disappears. But not for long. The next day proves even more eventful.
About 50 or so people report seeing this object as well, in a town that only has a population of less than 1,500.
And with that, Fife's reputation as a UFO hotspot is born.
Newspapers around the United States start covering this incident. Some of the reports state that people saw a triangular-shaped object, where other reports state that the object was more of a banana shape. And everyone wants to know what happened.
But with little to corroborate the sightings, this Polaroid comes as potential proof.
There's been a lot of speculation that the anonymous Polaroid is related to this sighting.
Residents of Fife, Alabama still commemorate the 1989 UFO sightings with an annual Fife UFO Days festival. Hey, when life gives you lemons, right? But what to make of that Polaroid? We ask our experts to give us the full picture. We first check in with astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy to see if this is a genuine photograph.
So this is a Polaroid photo, and that means it was developed actually in camera. So there's not really a whole lot of room to do any kind of photography tricks in the darkroom. So I don't believe this photo has been manipulated after it was captured whatsoever.
So it seems to be an actual airborne object caught on camera, but is it theirs or ours? Physicist Matthew Shadagas considers whether this could be a man-made aircraft.
Fife, Alabama is not too far from Huntsville, Alabama, also known as Rocket City. So one possibility is that this was some sort of experimental craft.
But descriptions of the Fife UFOs give Shadagas reason to doubt man-made tech is involved.
Witnesses have stated that no sound occurred. So this would seem to make the human-made aircraft hypothesis pretty problematic, to say the least. You would need to hear something like jet engine or propellers.
So could what dozens of people saw be an alien craft? And could this Polaroid be the proof? McCarthy, for one, isn't so sure.
This photograph actually contradicts a lot of the reports of triangular-shaped or banana-shaped UFOs. This one is more saucer-shaped.
So this probably isn't one of the Fife UFOs. In fact, McCarthy's not sure it's a UFO at all.
Look at how the upper portion of it is darker than the bottom portion. And ask yourself, how would that be possible when we all know the sky is brighter than the ground during the day?
While the photo may not be doctored, McCarthy says this irregularity leads him to believe that the photo is actually staged.
You see, if there was a window here, and this object was actually inside a room and being backlit by the sky that was behind it outside, then that would explain why it was more shadowed closer to the observer.
In fact, McCarthy demonstrates this by staging his own photo with an ordinary lens cap playing the part of the UFO.
That's why I think the way this was captured was by placing an object on a window and taking a photo of it.
Our verdict? The Polaroid may be staged, but the original sighting out of Fife is still unexplained in our book. And if the anonymous photographer behind the Polaroid is watching, feel free to come forward and prove us wrong. The Nephilim are biblical giants mentioned in the book of Enoch. They're usually understood to be merely legendary beings. But could the discovery of what some believe is a massive human finger prove that these giants once existed? 1988, beer hooker Egypt. Gregor Spari, a Swiss entrepreneur and ancient Egyptian aficionado, meets a local bartender with knowledge of black market archaeology. He introduces Spari to an elderly grave robber named Naguib, who shows Spari a rag with this wrapped in it. It looks like a massive mummified human finger. Naguib allows Spari to hold the finger, and he determines it must be an enormous 13 3/4 inches long and about 2.5 inches thick. Let's get a closer look. We see what looks like broken bone, as well as a knuckle and even a fingernail. The finger is allegedly several centuries old and appears to have been cut off with something sharp. Remnants of fungus are visible, and there appears to be bite marks from rats or mice. Field researcher Ken Gerhard explains that there are numerous legends throughout time suggesting that the ancient pyramids were actually constructed by giants.
In 1821, a French mineralogist by the name of Frédéric Cailloux was the first to research the Nubian pyramids of Meroe, and he actually discovered a depiction of a giant man carrying 2 elephants on his shoulders. So we're talking about full-grown African elephants here. Based on the size of this finger, one could speculate that its owner would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 feet tall, an actual giant. So this would indicate the possibility that the pyramids were actually constructed by immense giant humans. We can also recall the notes of the Roman historian Flavius Josephus, who wrote about these ancient giants of Egypt and noted that the last Egyptian giants died out during the time of Joshua from the Bible. He wrote that these giants were amazing to look at, but very terrifying to listen to, due to the nature of their loud, booming voices, which almost sounded like lions roaring.
Well, Egypt may have had at least one giant, Experts recently analyzed an unusually large set of skeletal remains that were found in a tomb almost 5,000 years old. Some believe these bones belong to the Egyptian pharaoh Sennacht and may show the first ever case of the hormonal disorder acromegaly, otherwise known as gigantism. But does this finger make that skeleton seem small? We asked our experts. Anthropologist Kathy Strain says the hormonal disorder acromegaly is responsible for the height of people like Robert Wadlow, who stood a record-holding 8'11". But that's still way too short to match this finger. People have been making the case for true giants in the United States for years, but they may be little more than tall tales.
During the 20th century, there were rumors going around that archaeologists at the time were finding all these giant skeletons. Giants in the Native American community would grow to somewhere like 7 or 8 or 9 feet tall. But when we look at those facts, when we go to the Smithsonian and try to see those amazing skeletons, they always end up being hoaxes. And so there's no proof whatsoever that anybody taller than almost 9 feet tall ever existed.
Professor of anatomy Jeff Meldrum says a creature exceeding 15 feet tall wouldn't look very human.
Well, the human anatomy and physiology, essentially stretched over this exaggerated skeletal framework, comes up short. Organ failures and other problems of circulation, joints. These individuals usually die prematurely. You can't take a mouse and enlarge it to the size of an elephant. It just would not work.
If humans can't achieve giant status, then where did this mummified finger come from?
If, in fact, this digit were simply mummified, it would have lost a lot more fatty tissue through the mummification process. And so the plump appearance of this brown, aged-looking digit would be gone. It would be essentially just a brown, leathery skin stretched over the skeleton of a finger.
How was the finger constructed then? According to his story, Sparry was allowed to hold and photograph this mysterious object, but was forbidden to take it anywhere for further examination.
A careful seamstress could, create something that's quite convincing. I can imagine some materials that could emulate the appearance of an ancient fingernail and could easily be crafted onto the artificial finger in a rather convincing way, especially if close examination was denied consistently.
So our verdict, we're going to have to call this a hoax. Without the X-ray, we can't say there's any solid proof giants ever roamed the Earth. Like Meldrum said, it just anatomically doesn't seem feasible that humans could grow to that size. But if you have any evidence to the contrary, let us know, and we promise we will not give you the finger. Occasionally, reports of unidentified flying objects emerge from the same geographic area for no apparent reason. It turns out Medellin, Colombia has become one of those places, and our next video may be more proof that something strange is happening in South America. June 2020, near Medellin, Colombia. Juan Morales is hanging out with his cousin when a strange light in the sky suddenly grabs his attention. He rushes to the window and captures this. A small string of light floats above the hills in the night sky. Zooming in reveals what appears to be a rectangular object lit by 4 green orb-like lights. Whatever it is, Juan and his cousin can't contain their astonishment.
Está haciendo lo mismo que yo. O sea, no se ve. Mira. Tengo la piel de gallina.
Está bien. We really think that was a really UFO because it didn't move, and when it disappeared in a second.
This sighting isn't just a random occurrence. In fact, a more recent sighting over Medellin that we plan to analyze on a future show is now being touted as some of the best UFO footage ever.
A pilot saw a strange object outside of his aircraft and was able to film it with his cell phone.
The craft races past at a stunning speed, but appears to be a metallic sphere with a point on either end.
That particular video went viral, and people all over the internet were commenting about whether this was some sort of alien spacecraft because of its strange shape and how it moved through the air.
So have the aliens re-emerged over Colombia?
After this video, I'm certain that the UFOs exist.
But others believe these aerial sightings are connected to a far more earthly concern.
We know that within recent years, with the shift in drone technology to becoming quite cheap, drug cartels are utilizing drones to essentially deliver or traffic drugs across borders or into other countries or locally. So there has been some speculation that this particular video actually shows a Colombian cartel's use of a drone to traffic drugs into the area.
A spike in UFO sightings in 2014 earned Medellin the honor of UFO hotspot status. But will our experts be able to identify this strange object in the Colombian skies? First, is this craft just something we see all the time? Could our green disk simply be a passing airplane?
There doesn't appear to be any kind of motion whatsoever with the object. And then the fact that it doesn't have the navigation lights like you would expect on an aircraft. You would see some potentially other kind of colors like white or red, maybe, on the object. But there's nothing that makes me believe that it's an aircraft.
But maybe it's a cartel drone. Cartel drones, seized by the Colombian military, had the ability to carry 22 pounds of cocaine and could travel about 60 miles in a single trip. But those drones were transporting drugs over the border to Panama, not in cities. Which is one reason why Mark D'Antonio doesn't think the theory makes sense.
If you were a drug smuggler, would you have a drone with big bright lights on it up in the sky? And probably not. If so, the drug smugglers are pretty imbecilic.
He thinks the lights also rule out any legitimate use.
Drones have mandated lighting, so you would see some red lights and some green lights. You have to have those lights in order to fly. It doesn't look to me a drone with known lighting configuration that I've seen.
So are we looking at something from beyond our world? In determining UFO activity, experts look for traits called the 5 observables, as seen in the UFOs recorded by the U.S. military. Anti-gravity capabilities, instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, and finally, the ability to move in space, air, and water.
Of the observables, it's very indistinct. You can't make out anything in terms of other than the lights to be able to determine if it had any control surfaces on it. The fact that it didn't make any kind of things like hypersonic speed, it wasn't transmedium. There's nothing that calls out that it's like, you know, the big mothership from another planet that's coming down.
However, D'Antonio believes he sees a clue to the object's identity, not in the lights, but its shape.
This could be a delta wing where we're missing a couple of the lights because they're sort of foreshortened in our view along the line of this side here.
A delta wing is a triangular swept-back airplane wing named for its similarity to the uppercase Greek letter delta.
And what kind of delta wing thing do we have that we fly in the air and it's relatively stationary? Well, a kite.
D'Antonio thinks the surrounding landscape seals the deal.
This is bright green throughout, so it's somewhat closer to us. When they zoom out, there's some fields down here. It would probably be close to 300 feet off the ground. Based on the size of the details in this area down here, and looking at the size of street lamps and windows, with a delta wing kite of about 4 feet across, it would actually fit this profile if it was over that field down below.
Our verdict? While we think D'Antonio's reasoning that this is a lit-up kite with green bulbs is sound, in our minds, the image is just too far away and indistinct to come to a definitive conclusion. So we're going to say this is an unidentified object, at least for now. Finally tonight, this story may be proof that two heads are not necessarily better than one. Take a look. September 27th, 2008. Commercial fisherman Christopher Johnston is working in the Indian Ocean off the coast of West Australia. After catching a pregnant blue shark, his crew cuts it open to release her pups back into the ocean. But of the many offspring released, one swims ahead of the rest. Take a look at this peculiar creature. It's got one tail and seems to have normal pelvic fins, but at the dorsal fin, things start to get a little strange. It splits in half into two heads, complete with two mouths, four eyes, and four nares, or nostrils.
This certainly isn't the only time a two-headed shark has been found. In fact, sightings of two-headed sharks seem to be on the rise in recent years. In 2011, a two-headed bull shark fetus was found off the coast of the Florida Keys.
These cases seem to be popping up all over the globe. Back in 2020, a living two-headed shark was even caught off the coast of India. According to Gerhard, this strange and possibly growing phenomenon isn't exclusive to sharks alone.
There have been examples of two-headed porpoises or dolphins that have been found in recent years as well. It's worth noting that in mythology and folklore, multi-headed animals are often revered or looked at as being magical. In Greek mythology, we have Cerberus. In Romanian folklore, the Balaur is a multi-headed dragon. And even in Chinese tradition, we have something called the nine-headed bird. So the theme of a multi-headed monster or animal seems to be prevalent all around the world. And it's a fair presumption that these different traditions were inspired by encounters with multi-headed animals like this one.
Longtime viewers of this show may remember this guy, a two-headed snake affectionately named Double Trouble. Against all odds, he thrived with his owner. There was only one Double Trouble, though. There have been multiple two-headed shark sightings. Should we be worried about an underwater army of two-headed sharks? Let's see what our experts think. Marine biologist Shay Steingas says a creature like this one would not live very long in the unforgiving waters of the deep.
You have two completely differently formed central nervous systems in terms of the head and brain. So this animal is taking two sets of stimuli in at once. And in addition, the normal streamlined structure of a shark isn't present here. So instead of moving smoothly through the water, this animal is going to encounter a lot of turbulence and a lot of water pressure just trying to navigate its environment.
However, we do know that, seemingly against all odds, there have been some survivors, such as the shark found back in India. And while the specific root cause for such a deformity may be hard to pin down, this condition does have a name.
What I'm seeing here looks like a form of dicephaly, which means two heads. And this is actually a really well-known genetic malformity that happens when twins do not separate correctly. This isn't a positive adaptation. In fact, it's evolutionarily detrimental.
So what is it exactly that's creating these two-headed terrors? Steingas believes pollution is a definite possibility.
We have to remember that our rivers and streams drain to the ocean. So these animals are literally swimming in industrial chemicals, a lot of which we don't even know about yet. So it's possible that pollution could have caused this type of deformity, but it's also possible that things like changing ocean temperatures could contribute to animals not developing correctly.
On top of global warming, the excessive fishing of our oceans might be contributing to a smaller gene pool.
We've also fished out a lot of our oceans, and that includes sharks. They don't have the same genetic diversity that they used to. In some species, there were only a few dozen animals left. So all of that genetic complexity and all of those beneficial adaptations that the species had before, they're actually kind of inbred now, and they're maybe less likely to thrive and survive.
The night was unusually still in the small desert town, a silence so profound it seemed to press against the windows of the old research lab perched on the edge of the rocky plateau, where Dr. Evelyn Harper had spent the last 6 years chasing shadows of myths, legends, and the unexplainable. Outside, the wind whispered across the sand dunes, carrying with it the faint scent of something ancient, something almost metallic, a smell that made her stomach tighten in anticipation. She had returned from the excavation site earlier that evening, her boots coated in the fine, ochre dust of the desert, her gloves stiff with the residue of the soil, and in her pack, wrapped carefully in layers of cloth, lay what the world would soon either scoff at or marvel over: a mummified finger, enormous in size, preserved in a way that defied conventional science, with skin darkened and stretched like leather over thick bones that could only belong to something far larger than any human ever documented. Evelyn had first heard whispers of this artifact in an old archive of colonial records, dusty ledgers that hinted at sightings of giants in the region, mysterious figures wandering the desert at dawn, leaving behind footprints that vanished before anyone could reach them. Skeptics had dismissed it as folklore, as tales spun to keep travelers wary of the barren landscape, but something in her gut told her that the finger was proof that the boundaries of human history were far wider than textbooks dared admit. As she placed the finger gently on the lab table under a single swinging lamp, its shadow stretched across the worn wood, an exaggerated, claw-like silhouette that seemed to writhe, and for a moment, she swore she could see movement, subtle and deliberate, as if the fingers still retained a memory of the hand that had once wielded it. Evelyn's assistant, Marcus Reed, leaned in from the corner, his face half-lit by the pale glow of the lamp, his expression a mixture of awe and incredulity. "You really think it's real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not a replica? Not some elaborate hoax?" Evelyn ran her gloved hand along the surface, feeling the ridges, the texture, the tiny cracks that betrayed centuries of decay. "It's real, Marcus. And if it is what I think it is, this changes everything we know about human evolution, about myths, about the giants that may have walked this planet long before recorded history." She set up the magnifying lens and peered closely, her breath fogging the glass slightly, tracing the deep, unnatural grooves in the knuckles, the remnants of fingernails so massive and thick that they suggested immense strength, a hand built not for delicate tasks, but for something far more powerful, far more primal. The lamp flickered as if protesting her intrusion into the past, and Evelyn's mind raced, recalling the legends she had studied, stories of enormous beings in the region, warriors who were said to duel in the early morning mists, leaving trails of destruction and awe in their wake. The colonial diaries described them as men of the mountains, enormous figures with hands like paddles and voices like distant thunder, worshipped and feared in equal measure by the local tribes. Many had dismissed those accounts, but here in her hands was tangible evidence. She glanced at Marcus, who was cautiously taking notes, his pen trembling slightly. "We need to verify it," he said. "Carbon dating, DNA analysis, structural comparison. We need absolute proof." Evelyn nodded, but a flicker of unease passed over her. Absolute proof had a way of attracting attention that could turn hostile. In recent weeks, she had begun noticing unmarked vehicles near the outskirts of town, shadows slipping across the edges of her field sight, strange calls on her phone with no caller ID, emails that disappeared before she could read them. Someone else knew. Someone else had been looking for this finger long before she had dug it up. The thought made her pulse quicken. The finger was more than a relic. It was a key, a lure, a signal that the boundaries between the known and the unknown were about to collapse. As she carefully transferred the finger into a secure containment box, she recalled the stories of her mentor, Dr. Henry Calloway, who had vanished 10 years ago under mysterious circumstances while pursuing a similar artifact in the Andes. His journals spoke of giants, of relics that could rewrite history, and of forces, human or otherwise, that would stop at nothing to suppress the truth. Evelyn had dismissed some of it as paranoia back then, but now, handling the finger, she felt a chill. The possibilities were exhilarating, yes, but dangerous. She looked toward Marcus, who was adjusting the lab's cameras, ensuring every angle was recorded. "We document everything," she said firmly. "Nothing leaves this lab without a record. And no one outside the circle gets a look until we're ready." "Understood." Marcus nodded, the gravity of the moment sinking in. "Understood. But Evelyn, if this is real, if this is a giant, people will come. They'll try to take it. Some might even kill for it." The words hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet understood. She had already felt the eyes watching, had already sensed the quiet threats threading through the desert nights. She didn't respond immediately, instead opening her laptop and cross-referencing images from the excavation site, overlaying the footprints, the skeletal fragments, the faint traces of what appeared to be massive tools, carefully carved from stone, but showing where patterns inconsistent with human hands. Each comparison seemed to confirm her hypothesis. The finger belonged to a being whose scale defied the imagination, whose existence was now undeniable. That night, she barely slept. Every creak in the old lab made her heart skip a beat. Every distant howl of coyotes sounded like a warning. She reviewed the footage from the site, noting the way shadows stretched at dawn, the impression of enormous silhouettes vanishing into the dunes. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew she was being watched, but she had to focus. This was bigger than fear. This was history waiting to be rewritten. By morning, the finger had been logged, photographed from every angle, and secured in a temperature-controlled chamber. Evelyn and Marcus sat with steaming mugs of coffee, exhaustion etched into their faces, when a knock at the lab door startled them. Evelyn froze, her instincts screaming that no one outside their team should be there. Marcus moved cautiously, checking the security feed. The corridor was empty. Yet the knock repeated, soft but insistent, echoing in the cold metal hallway. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the keypad, debating whether to respond. She decided to peek through the small observation window. There was no one in sight. The desert sun had risen, bright and unrelenting, and yet the shadow of the unknown clung stubbornly to the edges of the lab. She sighed and turned back to the finger, studying the curvature of the knuckle, the way the skin had shriveled but remained flexible, as if time had preserved not just the tissue, but a story embedded in every line, every scar. She whispered under her breath, a promise perhaps, to the giant whose hand had once grasped mountains. I will tell your story. I will prove you existed. The day passed in a blur of documentation and analysis, but as dusk approached, Evelyn noticed an anomaly. The finger, previously stable in its containment, seemed to pulse faintly under the ultraviolet scanner, a subtle glow emanating from deep within the bone, like a heartbeat or a warning. She frowned. Marcus, equally alarmed, suggested it could be contamination, a reaction to light or chemical residue, but Evelyn felt the hair on her arms rise. This was no ordinary relic. By evening, she had decided to conduct a preliminary DNA extraction, using extreme caution, protective measures, and a sterilized environment. As the first sample was taken, the analyzer emitted a series of rapid beeps. The sequence, when visualized, revealed an unusual structure, DNA patterns unlike anything cataloged, not merely human, but amplified, strange, almost otherworldly. Evelyn's breath caught. This isn't just a giant, she whispered. It's something else. Something older. Outside, the desert wind howled, rattling the lab's thin walls, as if echoing her realization. In that moment, the finger was no longer just a piece of history. It was a beacon, a provocation, a puzzle with stakes higher than she could yet comprehend. Somewhere out there, someone or something was aware that she had it. And the game, the real test of discovery and survival, was only just beginning. The sun set completely, leaving the lab in a dim twilight glow, shadows pooling in corners. Evelyn secured the finger once more, triple-locking the containment and reviewing security protocols. Marcus suggested sleep, but Evelyn shook her head. She could not rest while the artifact pulsed with that subtle, eerie life. She sat back, staring at the finger, feeling the weight of history and danger pressing down, knowing instinctively that this was only the first chapter of a story that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew. Somewhere beyond the desert, in the shadowed dunes, footprints appeared, enormous, deliberate, vanishing again before they could be fully traced. Evelyn did not see them yet, but she would. Soon. The proof was out there, and she was holding it in her hands. The desert night had deepened into an almost tangible darkness, a black velvet that pressed against the edges of the lab, seeping through the cracks of metal and glass, carrying with it a sense of expectation that made Evelyn Harper's skin crawl. She paced the small lab like a caged animal, boots scraping the worn floor, eyes darting to the containment chamber where the finger rested, under the dim emergency lights that hummed softly. Marcus had insisted on keeping the security cameras on high alert, their lenses sweeping every angle, yet even with all the technology, a gnawing doubt lingered in Evelyn's mind. They were not alone. She felt it in the vibrations of the floorboards, the faint whisper of air that shifted too deliberately, the tiny, almost imperceptible sound of sand brushing against the exterior of the lab. It was as if the desert itself was watching, waiting. She sat at the computer, running the first batch of DNA sequences from the finger, the code scrolling across the screen like a river of symbols, some familiar, others incomprehensible. The structure was unlike anything in the databases, a hybrid of human, something else, something ancient and vast. Her pulse quickened. The finger was not merely a relic of an unknown species of giant, it was proof of a lineage that had walked the earth long before humans claimed dominion, a line that might have survived in hidden enclaves, waiting to be rediscovered. "This is beyond anything we imagined," Marcus muttered from across the room, leaning over her shoulder. "We can't even classify it. Look at these gene sequences, some of these markers are anomalous. It's like evolution went sideways here." Evelyn didn't respond immediately, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, reluctant to close the gaps between discovery and reality. She had been chasing legends all her life, reading dusty manuscripts, following footprints in the sand, and now, holding concrete evidence, she felt a mixture of triumph and terror. Outside, a wind gust rattled the lab shutters, a sound that echoed like distant thunder. Evelyn shivered, realizing the wind carried more than sand. It carried whispers, remnants of an old desert language perhaps, the kind that had been lost to time. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a fragment of her mentor's warnings returned. When you awaken the past awakens you. She had dismissed them as eccentric caution, but now, staring at the finger in its containment, she felt the weight of that statement. The finger was awake in a sense, not animate, but alive in memory and in power, radiating something that her instruments could not quantify, a presence that the human mind sensed but could not fully interpret. Marcus cleared his throat. "I've secured all entrances. No one gets in, and no one gets out without triggering alerts." "But Evelyn, what if they come for it anyway?" He didn't have to finish the sentence. She understood. The finger had value beyond scientific curiosity. Its existence challenged history, religion, anthropology, and the very notion of human supremacy. There would be those who wanted to control it, exploit it, or destroy it to maintain the accepted narrative. She stared at the containment box. "Then we protect it," she said quietly, "no matter the cost." The night deepened further, the lab illuminated only by the faint glow of monitors and emergency lights. Evelyn decided to cross-reference the fingerprints from the excavation site with historical archives. She pulled up images from colonial sketches, old photographs of indigenous tribes claiming encounters with enormous beings, and accounts of footprints that measured more than a meter in length. Overlaying them with the finger's size, she realized that the proportions matched almost perfectly. The finger was not an anomaly, it was part of a larger entity whose existence had been meticulously recorded by those brave, or foolish, enough to confront it. A sudden beep from the containment unit made them both jump. Evelyn rushed over, heart hammering, only to see the status indicator flashing red briefly before returning to green. Marcus leaned in, eyes wide. "Was that?" Evelyn shook her head. "Probably a glitch. But record everything. No assumptions." Still, she could not shake the feeling that something had reacted to their presence, to the light, to the instruments probing its structure. She ran a thermal scan across the chamber. Nothing unusual appeared. Yet the sensation persisted, a faint pressure in the air, a subtle vibration underfoot, as though the finger's memory extended beyond its physical form, reaching for her awareness. Exhaustion finally forced them to sit. Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the lab, and for a moment, she allowed herself to consider the enormity of their find. The finger represented a lineage, a history untold, and a story the world was not ready for. Marcus sipped his coffee cautiously. You ever think about what might be out there? I mean, besides the finger. Evelyn met his gaze, eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. All the time. Every site, every legend, every footprint, it all points to something larger. Something that survived in shadows. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. And now, it's found us. The sound of wind shifted again, more forceful, rattling the outer shutters. Evelyn felt a shiver of unease. She decided to check the perimeter cameras, scanning the desert dunes for any signs of movement. At first, there was nothing. Then a faint distortion, like a shadow too large to belong to any human, stretched across the sands before disappearing behind a ridge. Her breath caught. There, she whispered. Marcus leaned closer. What did you see? Evelyn replayed the footage, enhancing the contrast. The shadow had moved with deliberate intent, a pace unnatural, almost calculating. It was gone now, but the impression it left was undeniable. Something enormous was out there, aware, watching, waiting. She swallowed hard, realizing that the finger was a beacon, not merely a specimen. The artifact's presence had awakened awareness, drawing eyes that had not been looking for centuries. That realization sent adrenaline surging through her veins. We need more data, she said firmly. We can't just study it passively. We need to understand its origins, its species, and, if possible, its motives. And we need to do it fast, before someone or something intervenes. Marcus nodded, the lines of worry on his face deepening. They worked into the early hours, running chemical analyses, UV scans, and microscopic tissue examinations. Evelyn documented every detail, every anomaly. Yet the deeper they delved, the more questions arose. The finger's composition suggested cellular structures far more resilient than any human tissue, with an unusual ability to resist decay, as if evolution had equipped it to survive millennia in harsh environments. More unnerving were the chemical traces embedded within the skin, elements not found in local geology, isotopes suggesting an origin unknown on Earth. Evelyn paused, staring at the results. Marcus, do you realize what this implies? He shook his head. I can't even speculate. It doesn't fit anything in our understanding of biology. She ran her hands through her hair. It's either a species completely unknown, or something else entirely. Something extraterrestrial, maybe. Something that walked this planet when humans were still hunting in caves. Silence hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the desert wind carried a mournful howl, as if lamenting their intrusion. Evelyn felt the hairs on her arms rise. Her instincts screamed caution, yet the thrill of discovery surged. She would not turn back now. Somewhere deep within the finger, there was information, encoded in DNA, in cellular memory, in history, that demanded to be uncovered. As dawn approached, Evelyn prepared a secure transport protocol in case they had to relocate the finger. Every measure of security, every possible precaution was considered. She knew that once word got out, the finger would attract not only scientists but collectors, zealots, and those whose ambitions were darker. She glanced at Marcus, whose eyes betrayed both excitement and fear. We're standing on the edge of something monumental, she said. And the world isn't ready. A faint sound from the lab's ventilation made her freeze, a subtle scratching, almost deliberate, coming from within the ducts. Evelyn and Marcus exchanged a look. The lab was sealed. No one could have entered. And yet the sound persisted, a reminder that the finger's influence might extend beyond physical boundaries, that the past could reach into the present in ways they could not yet comprehend. Evelyn knew then that the next days would define not only their careers, but their very survival. The finger was no longer just an artifact. It was a signal, a challenge, a warning. Somewhere beyond the dunes, enormous eyes, unseen but aware, were tracking them. And the desert, once a silent witness, had begun to speak in subtle, terrifying ways. They worked through the morning, documenting anomalies and preparing for potential threats, but Evelyn could not ignore a creeping sense of dread. The finger's story was incomplete, but it was awakening, reaching into consciousness like a distant echo. and she felt that echo, faint but undeniable, in the pit of her stomach, a warning that the line between observer and participant was blurring. She resolved to dig deeper, to chase every clue, even as the desert itself seemed to conspire against them, sending shadows, winds, and whispers that hinted at truths too large to contain. And in that moment, she understood fully that discovery came at a cost, that proof was never without peril, and that some secrets, once unearthed, could never be buried again. The morning sun cut across the desert like a blade, harsh and unrelenting, illuminating the lab with a glare that made the metal walls glint like a beacon. Evelyn Harper, bleary-eyed but resolute, moved through the lab with precise, methodical steps, her focus entirely on the containment chamber where the mummified finger rested. Marcus Reed had been pacing the lab since sunrise, eyes darting nervously toward every shadow and every corner of the ceiling, as though expecting something to emerge from the very walls. The night had been long, full of restless dreams for Evelyn, dreams in which enormous hands reached across time and space, touching her as if demanding recognition, acknowledgement, and perhaps warning. She shook off the remnants of sleep and settled in front of her computer, reviewing the previous night's data. The DNA sequences continued to defy classification. The structure of the cells suggested a physiology capable of surviving extreme climates, high radiation, and even substantial injuries, tissue that could endure millennia with minimal decay. Evelyn's fingers danced across the keyboard as she cross-referenced the data with the world's most comprehensive genetic archives. Nothing matched. Nothing came close. The finger, in its preserved state, was unique, singular, a relic from a branch of life that seemed both intimately tied to humanity and utterly alien. "Marcus," she said, voice tight with tension, "I need you to run a comparative analysis between these markers and all known primates, hominids, and any anomalous reports of genetic sequences that were previously discarded as errors." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard, aware of the stakes. "I'll get it running, but this could take hours, maybe days." Evelyn ignored the time frame. They didn't have the luxury of patience. Somewhere out there, she knew, others were aware of the finger. Perhaps shadowy organizations, perhaps treasure hunters, perhaps descendants of those who had first buried the finger, protecting it from humanity's relentless curiosity. The thought made her pulse quicken. She turned her attention to the archives she had brought from the excavation site, ancient texts, inscriptions on stone, fragments of murals depicting figures so large that their shadows dwarfed human structures. In one weathered drawing, an enormous hand reached down, almost touching a village, while tiny humans stared upward in awe and terror. The resemblance to the finger in her lab was undeniable. She traced the outlines with her gloved hand, imagining the sheer size of the creature to which it had belonged. Her mind began connecting dots she hadn't dared to consider: the legends of giants, the footprints found in isolated deserts, the mysterious disappearances of explorers who had sought these beings, and the artifacts themselves, objects of impossible scale, hidden from the eyes of ordinary humans. Evelyn leaned back, a chill running down her spine. The finger was not simply evidence, it was proof that the stories were true. And proof, she knew, was dangerous. Marcus interrupted her thoughts. "Evelyn, you might want to see this." He pointed to the security monitor, where a figure had appeared at the perimeter of the lab compound. Evelyn squinted. At first, it looked like a mirage, a trick of the light on the sand. But then, unmistakably, a silhouette moved with deliberate, unnatural grace. It was enormous, far taller than any human, and its gait was measured, almost predatory. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest. She motioned for Marcus to zoom the camera. The figure's limbs were disproportionately long, the head elongated, the shoulders wide and hunched. Even at this distance, it radiated an undeniable sense of power, a presence that seemed to distort the air around it. Evelyn whispered, more to herself than to Marcus, "It's come for the finger." Marcus paled. "We need to secure it immediately." "If it breaches the lab—" "No," Evelyn interrupted. "We observe. We document. If we interfere, we may trigger something we can't control." She grabbed her camera and binoculars, moving to the observation window. The figure had paused at the edge of the sand, scanning the lab compound, as though aware that the finger was within. Its eyes, though impossible to discern from this distance, seemed to hold intelligence, a cognition that was not merely animal but strategic aware. Evelyn felt a mix of awe and terror. "It knows," she said softly. "It knows we have it." They watched for what felt like an eternity, the desert wind sweeping the dunes in waves. The figure began moving again, slower now, methodical, and then it vanished behind a ridge, disappearing from the camera's view. Evelyn exhaled, trying to steady her racing heart. "It's testing us," she said, voice trembling slightly. Marcus remained silent, fear etched on his face. "We need to plan," she continued. "If it returns, we need to be ready." Hours passed, yet the desert remained deceptively still, as if holding its breath. Evelyn used the time to continue her analysis, overlaying the finger's dimensions onto skeletal reconstructions of known hominids. The scale discrepancy was staggering. The finger suggested a being at least 3 times larger than the tallest human ever recorded. Its musculature and joint structure implied immense strength, capable of feats that humans could scarcely imagine. Yet there was intelligence in the proportions, dexterity, and curvature. This was not a brute. It was a being capable of manipulation, strategy, and perhaps communication. As the sun rose high, casting stark shadows across the desert, Evelyn and Marcus took stock of their resources. The lab was isolated, secure, and equipped with cameras, locks, and a rudimentary alarm system. But they were human, vulnerable, and they faced an unknown entity of unimaginable power. Evelyn knew that the finger had drawn attention. The desert had shifted from silent witness to active participant, and she had a sinking feeling that what came next would test every limit of their courage, intellect, and morality. Marcus suggested reinforcing the perimeter and setting up motion sensors, while Evelyn prepared the lab for rapid response, placing the finger in its most secure containment and preparing a secondary emergency protocol for transport. She felt a strange resonance as she touched the containment box, an almost imperceptible vibration that seemed synced with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The finger was not inert. It was alive in memory and essence. That evening, Evelyn stepped outside briefly, scanning the dunes with binoculars. The wind had shifted, carrying strange echoes, like footsteps or whispers just beyond comprehension. She froze, catching sight of movement in the distance. Large, deliberate shapes shifted against the horizon, then disappeared. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She returned inside and locked the door behind her, her mind racing. The finger was a catalyst, and the desert was now a stage on which forces far beyond her understanding were converging. That night, sleep was impossible. Evelyn dreamed of the giant, of enormous hands reaching across mountains, of voices like rolling thunder, of eyes that glowed with intelligence and awareness. She awoke to find Marcus awake as well, staring at the finger with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's calling," he whispered. "Or waiting." Evelyn nodded. "Or testing. Whatever it is, it knows we have it, and it's deciding what comes next." They spent the early hours documenting the finger's properties, running thermal scans, electromagnetic readings, and chemical analyses. Every measurement returned anomalies, electromagnetic fields stronger than the Earth's natural fluctuations, chemical traces unmatched in any terrestrial laboratory, and thermal readings that hinted at internal energy, as if the finger retained vitality beyond its mummified state. Evelyn realized that the artifact was more than a fossil. It was a repository, a container of something vast, perhaps. Consciousness, memory, or power. And somewhere out there, the original owner, or its kin, was aware of their intrusion. As the morning light filtered through the lab, she made a decision. They could not remain stationary. The finger needed to be studied, but they also needed to move, to test whether its presence attracted or repelled these enormous beings. Evelyn knew the desert would never be safe for them again, that the finger had transformed their reality. Marcus looked at her with wide eyes. "You mean take it into the field again?" Evelyn nodded. We need to understand it in context, where it came from. But we prepare for anything. If it comes for us, we survive, or we die trying. Outside, the dunes shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to her words. Evelyn shivered. The proof was no longer just out there, it was reaching for them, calling them into a confrontation that would test the limits of human understanding and courage. Somewhere, in the desert's hidden valleys and shadowed ridges, enormous eyes watched, waiting, calculating, and the mummified finger, inert to the casual observer, pulsed with the memory of giants long past, ready to reclaim its place in the world. By midday, the desert had transformed into a harsh expanse of heat and glare, each grain of sand shimmering like a million tiny embers under the unforgiving sun. Evelyn Harper and Marcus Reed had packed their mobile lab equipment carefully, leaving nothing behind that could compromise the finger's security, yet aware that even their best preparations might be insufficient against forces beyond comprehension. The finger, now nestled in a reinforced, insulated containment pod, sat at the center of their makeshift vehicle, its shadow magnified by the sun's angle and the reinforced panels that surrounded it. Evelyn felt a constant thrum in the air, subtle, almost melodic, yet deep enough to resonate in her chest. She could not shake the feeling that the desert itself was alive, that every shift of wind, every ripple of sand, carried intelligence and intention. Marcus drove cautiously along the narrow dune paths, the mobile lab bumping over ridges with each uneven slope. He glanced at Evelyn, noticing her tense posture, her gaze flicking constantly to the containment pod. "Do you ever wonder," he began hesitantly, "if it knows we're moving it? If it cares?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the horizon, where the dunes merged seamlessly into a line of rocky cliffs. The patterns of sand reminded her of skeletal ridges, of enormous hands sculpting the landscape over eons. "I think it does more than care," she said finally, her voice low and steady. "I think it watches. I think it evaluates. And I think it can act." Marcus swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. "Act? Like it did last night," she interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Testing. Probing. Seeing if we are worthy or weak. We are intruders into its world now." The desert seemed to hum with agreement, a low vibration that traveled beneath the tires and through the reinforced floor, as though the sand itself whispered warnings. Evelyn adjusted the pod sensors, checking for any anomaly, any residual electromagnetic pulses. Last night's readings had been unusual, almost intelligent, but fleeting. Today, the ambient interference had heightened subtly, suggesting that the finger's influence extended farther than the confines of the pod. "We need a site," Evelyn murmured, almost to herself, "somewhere remote but geologically rich, where we can study it in context." Marcus nodded. He knew she meant beyond just DNA analysis. She wanted history, environment, and legend intertwined, proof not just in the lab, but in the earth itself. As they crested a ridge, the desert unfolded like a vast ocean of gold and ochre. Evelyn's pulse quickened when she noticed impressions in the sand ahead. Massive footprints, half buried by wind and erosion, stretched across the dunes. Their dimensions dwarfed even the largest human footprints she had ever seen, each print deep and deliberate, as if the being that left them had moved with intent and power. She turned to Marcus. "Stop." Slowly. The vehicle ground to a halt, the tires sinking slightly in the sand. Evelyn stepped down, approaching the prints cautiously, careful not to disturb the surrounding sand patterns. The scale of the prints was staggering. From the depth and width, she estimated the creature to be at least 12 feet tall, with a mass far beyond any human norm. The curvature of the toes, the spacing, and the claw-like impressions suggested a creature adapted to both movement across sand and potential climbing over rocky terrain. Evelyn took careful photographs, sketches, and measurements. Marcus, initially hesitant, soon joined, documenting the tracks with drones and infrared imaging. "This is insane," he murmured. "This is exactly what the finger suggested." Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. "And we're not alone. Whoever or whatever made these prints, they are connected. The finger is the key, and these prints are the path." They followed the trail cautiously, aware that movement in the desert could draw attention. Evelyn noted subtle disturbances in the sand, ripples, shifted stones, depressions that suggested observation, surveillance, or perhaps ritual behavior. She recorded everything meticulously, her scientific mind attempting to categorize the anomalous with every known method, while her instincts screamed that they were intruding on a living memory, something ancient and sentient. Hours passed, the desert heat becoming nearly unbearable. The sun blazed overhead, casting elongated shadows that danced eerily across the dunes. Evelyn felt the first stirrings of what she could only describe as a resonance, vibrations through the pod, a faint pulsing in the sand beneath her boots. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and unmistakably synchronized with the subtle electrical anomalies recorded around the finger. She glanced at Marcus, whose expression mirrored her own awe. "It's responding," she said softly. "Or communicating. Or warning." Marcus shook his head. "Communicating? With us." Evelyn didn't answer. She crouched next to a footprint, placing her hand inside the deepest indentation. The scale was overwhelming. Her hand was engulfed in the impression, fingers barely brushing the sides. She felt the vibrations again, faint, yet undeniable, coursing through her bones, as if the desert itself were alive and aware of her intrusion. They decided to establish a temporary field lab near the ridge, a position with visibility over the tracks yet offering partial concealment. Marcus set up solar generators, drones, and motion sensors, while Evelyn focused on creating a geologically controlled area where they could examine samples without interference. She collected sand, minerals, and fragments of what appeared to be petrified plant matter crushed beneath the weight of enormous feet. The analysis suggested that the prints were not merely modern. They had persisted through time, with sedimentation patterns indicating repeated traversal over centuries. Evelyn's pulse quickened. If this was true, the finger belonged to a lineage that had survived the eons, hidden in remote regions, observing, perhaps interacting minimally with humans to remain undetected. Night fell swiftly in the desert, temperatures plummeting, and the silence returned, dense, absolute, punctuated only by distant coyote calls and the occasional rustle of wind through sand. Evelyn and Marcus secured the finger, now in its pod, inside the mobile lab. They set up infrared cameras and motion detectors, anticipating any return of the enormous being whose footprints they followed. Evelyn could not sleep, her thoughts a mixture of exhilaration and dread. She imagined the giant returning to the site, tracing the path of its ancestors, responding to the disturbance she and Marcus had caused. A subtle hum filled the lab, almost musical in tone, synchronized with the vibrations she had felt earlier. She shivered, recognizing it as a sign. The finger was active, and the desert was attuned to its presence. Hours later, a sudden disturbance outside the lab caused both to awaken instantly. The drones had detected movement at the edge of visibility. Evelyn grabbed her camera and binoculars, peering into the darkness. Shadows shifted beyond the dune ridge, shapes too massive to belong to any human, their movements deliberate, calculated, and eerily silent. Evelyn whispered, "They're here." Marcus's hand trembled slightly on the control panel. How many? Evelyn couldn't tell. She focused on the silhouettes, their outlines barely visible against the faint starlight, yet their size was undeniable, tall, elongated limbs, broad shoulders, and heads that seemed disproportionately large. A feeling of primal fear mingled with awe washed over her. She realized that what they were witnessing was not a single creature but a group, perhaps a family or a tribe, whose members had survived hidden in the desert for centuries. The realization was staggering. The finger had not been lost. It had been deliberately concealed, preserved as a beacon, a message, or a test for any who might discover it. Evelyn adjusted the thermal imaging and zoomed in on the figures. Their heat signatures were faint, almost muted, as if their bodies possessed a unique thermoregulation system, further evidence of evolutionary divergence. Marcus muttered under his breath, "We're not ready for this." Evelyn shook her head. "No one is ever ready. But we have proof, and we have a chance to understand." We observe, we document, and we survive. The figures moved with purpose, tracing the footprints, pausing near the edge of the ridge, studying the human presence with intelligence and caution. Evelyn felt the resonance again, stronger this time, vibrating through the lab floor, through the pod, through her very bones. The finger, inert to casual eyes, pulsed with recognition. It was a call and a warning, a signal that the Desert Guardians had detected her intrusion and were now evaluating her worth, her intentions, her understanding. Evelyn whispered, almost reverently, "It knows we're here. And it is deciding what comes next." Marcus, pale and tense, glanced at the finger. "What do we do if it attacks?" Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes cold but resolute. "We do nothing that provokes it. We observe. We respect. We survive." Night deepened, and the desert became an orchestra of shadows and vibrations, the echoes of the past alive in every grain of sand. Evelyn knew, with a certainty that bordered on terror and wonder, that they had entered a threshold where myth met reality, where proof demanded courage, and where giants, long forgotten by humanity, waited to reveal their story. Somewhere beyond the dunes, enormous eyes glimmered faintly, and the desert, alive with memory, held its breath. The finger, silent yet potent, had drawn them into a world that was far larger, far stranger, and far older than they had ever imagined. And in that silence, Evelyn understood that the true challenge was only beginning. The desert night stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of black punctuated by faint stars that shimmered like distant eyes, watching and waiting. Evelyn, Harper, and Marcus Reed huddled inside the mobile lab, the containment pod holding the mummified finger at the center of their attention. Despite the layers of security and reinforced walls, an uneasy sensation pressed against them, a presence that seemed to infiltrate every corner of the lab, felt in the vibrations of the floor, in the subtle hum of the generators, and in the rhythmic pulse that emanated from the finger itself. Evelyn could not sleep. Every attempt to rest was interrupted by dreams that were more like visions, massive hands brushing across mountains, enormous eyes observing tiny humans, and a voice, unearthly yet clear, that whispered in a language she did not know, yet somehow understood. The finger had awakened memories, or perhaps instincts, that reached across time. Marcus, sitting nearby, kept scanning the perimeter with drones and infrared cameras. "It's almost too quiet out there," he muttered. Not a sound, not a movement except for the occasional shift in the sand. "But I've learned by now silence is never empty here." Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the pod. "It's watching, assessing, learning." She reached for her laptop, pulling up the analysis from the previous day. The DNA sequences had been partially matched to known hominid genes, but the anomalies were staggering, mutations that suggested a lineage untouched by natural selection, accelerated evolution, and traits designed for survival in extreme environments. The scale of this being, the intelligence implied in the structure, and the adaptability all pointed to something entirely different, something ancient, almost primordial, yet calculated in its design. Evelyn realized that their understanding of human history, of evolution, of myth, had just been appended. Somewhere out there, hidden among the dunes and cliffs, creatures of unimaginable size and cognition were aware that the finger had been moved, that its presence had been detected, and that it now rested in the hands of humans. This awareness was deliberate, intelligent, and perhaps even strategic. She turned to Marcus. "We need to understand the behavioral patterns of these beings. How they move, how they respond to intrusion, how they communicate, and most importantly, what the finger represents to them." Marcus leaned back, a frown of concern etched across his face. "You're talking about studying something that could squash us like insects. This isn't just science anymore, it's survival." Evelyn did not respond immediately. She was already calculating variables, overlaying the environmental data with the footprint patterns they had found earlier, and noticing subtle shifts in the sand that could indicate habitual movement, perhaps even a patrol route. Her mind raced through possibilities. If the finger was a relic, a memory, or even a signaling device, then its guardians, the enormous beings they had glimpsed, were likely evaluating her every action. The thought made her pulse accelerate. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying fine grains of sand in wraith-like tendrils across the desert. The motion sensors flickered briefly, picking up patterns that were too massive to belong to any human. Evelyn's stomach tightened. "They're near," she said softly. "They've returned." Marcus hurried to the monitoring screens, scanning for any thermal or visual signature. For a moment, the desert seemed empty. Then, in the distance, shadows coalesced, shapes too large, too deliberate to be random. They moved with caution, observing, calculating, almost ritualistic in their pacing. Evelyn adjusted the infrared camera, zooming in. She saw figures with elongated limbs, massive torsos, and heads that were angular and intelligent. Even in the limited light, their posture suggested awareness, strategy, and perhaps a hierarchy among them. The finger pulsed faintly within the containment pod, synchronizing with the subtle vibrations emanating from the desert itself. Evelyn realized that this was not merely a coincidence. The finger acted as a conduit, connecting the beings to the world, sensing their environment, and possibly guiding their decisions. "They're communicating," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Through the finger, or maybe through the ground, the air, the vibrations." Marcus shook his head, incredulous. "We're dealing with something beyond comprehension." "And you want to analyze them?" Evelyn's eyes met his. "We don't have a choice. If we don't understand them, we won't survive their next move. Observation is protection. Knowledge is our weapon." They watched the desert figures for hours, noting the patterns of movement, the pauses near certain ridges, the way the silhouettes seemed to align with celestial markers, as if reading the terrain in conjunction with the stars. Evelyn began recording every detail meticulously, overlaying maps, and constructing models of their movement patterns. She noticed that the figures never touched the ground where the finger had been moved, suggesting recognition, respect, or ritual caution. This behavior confirmed her earlier suspicions. The finger was more than a relic. It was central to a cultural or biological system she barely understood. As the night deepened, Evelyn felt a shift in the resonance. The vibrations from the pod grew stronger, rhythmic, almost musical in nature, as though the finger itself was communicating with its kin. The desert became alive with sound and sensation, faint but unmistakable. She shivered. "Marcus, it's calling them. Or warning them. Or both." Marcus adjusted the thermal imaging, catching glimpses of movement in the dunes, rapid, deliberate, yet careful to avoid direct confrontation. Evelyn's mind raced. These beings were intelligent, cautious, and aware of the finger's significance. She realized that they had entered a negotiation of presence, one that was silent, subtle, and profoundly dangerous. Hours passed, punctuated by intermittent disturbances, subtle changes in wind patterns, and the faint pulse of the finger. Evelyn realized that the beings outside were not aggressive in the conventional sense. They were evaluating, determining the humans' intentions, their capabilities, their understanding. The tension was unbearable. Marcus, exhausted, leaned against the wall, muttering, "I never thought I'd feel so tiny in the desert, and we're sitting in a lab with a finger." Evelyn could only nod, her gaze locked on the containment pod. Then, a new development. One of the silhouettes approached closer, visible in the infrared spectrum as a massive form, almost humanoid, yet impossibly large, moving with deliberate caution. It stopped just beyond the ridge, crouched slightly, and for the first time, she thought she saw eyes, intelligent, assessing, aware. The pulse from the finger quickened, synchronized with a low-frequency vibration that she could feel in her chest. Evelyn realized they were communicating across some unknown medium, chemical, electromagnetic, psychic, or perhaps all three. She took careful notes, documenting the changes in frequency, duration, and intensity, hoping to find a pattern that could explain this extraordinary phenomenon. Hours later, dawn broke over the desert, casting long shadows and illuminating the contours of dunes that had remained untouched for centuries. The silhouettes retreated, disappearing behind ridges, leaving faint impressions in the sand that confirmed their massive scale. Evelyn exhaled, exhausted but exhilarated. They're intelligent, she said softly. They're aware of the finger, of us, and they're cautious. They know what we have, and they respect it or fear it. Marcus leaned over the pod, eyes wide with awe. Respect or fear. That makes me feel better, he said dryly, though his hands trembled. Evelyn smiled faintly. Either way, we've learned something invaluable tonight. Observation, patience, understanding. The finger is not just a relic, it's a bridge. She realized that the challenges ahead would be greater, interpreting their behavior, predicting their actions, and ensuring the finger remained safe. It was clear now that any movement, any interference, could trigger a response far beyond human capabilities. Yet, she also understood that retreat was not an option. Knowledge demanded engagement, courage demanded risk, and proof demanded action. As they prepared to analyze the morning samples, Evelyn documented every observation, every vibration, every pulse. The finger's memory, consciousness, or influence was vast, and she felt the responsibility pressing on her like a physical weight. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the beings had retreated, yet their awareness lingered in the sand, in the air, in the subtle tremors that could only be detected by those attuned to the extraordinary. Evelyn Harper knew, with absolute certainty, that the proof was no longer passive. It was alive in memory, in the land, and in the beings that had survived millennia to protect it. And the journey to understanding, survival, and revelation was only beginning. The desert sun had climbed high, its heat unbearable, yet Evelyn Harper and Marcus Reed persisted, their focus entirely consumed by the mobile lab and the mummified finger that had become the epicenter of their reality. The air shimmered above the dunes, rippling like liquid gold, making distant ridges appear to sway, to breathe. Evelyn adjusted the containment pod's monitoring sensors, taking note of subtle fluctuations in temperature, electromagnetic interference, and low-frequency vibrations that emanated from the finger. Each pulse seemed to carry meaning, a rhythm that she could feel in her bones, as if the artifact itself was alive in some dimension beyond ordinary perception. Marcus, seated beside her with a tablet in hand, scrolled through the night's infrared and thermal recordings, highlighting anomalies in movement patterns across the dunes. "Look at this," he said quietly, pointing to faint impressions that appeared intermittently, forming an almost circuitous path, as though the silhouettes had been exploring, assessing, or perhaps performing some form of ritual. Evelyn leaned over the screen, her brow furrowed. They are intelligent. They're not hunting or attacking. They're observing, calculating. And these patterns, they're deliberate, repetitive, and consistent. It's a form of communication or territory marking or both. Marcus exhaled, a mixture of awe and dread. I feel like we're trespassing into a world that isn't ours, and they know it. Evelyn didn't reply immediately. Instead, she carefully reviewed the genetic analysis from the finger. The DNA sequences defied classification, showing patterns that were partly hominid, partly unknown, with cellular structures capable of resisting extreme decay and environmental stress. Certain isotopes within the tissue suggested an origin that was perhaps not entirely terrestrial, hinting at evolutionary paths humanity had never encountered. She felt a thrill of discovery intertwined with an icy edge of fear. They were holding proof of something monumental, yet that proof carried risks far beyond their comprehension. Evelyn's gaze returned to the pod. The finger pulsed softly, emitting vibrations faint yet unmistakable, resonating with the subtle shifts in the desert. She realized that their presence, their observation, and even the act of studying it might influence the behavior of the enormous beings she had glimpsed the previous night. Every measurement, every motion, every sound mattered. Hours passed, and the desert heat intensified, but Evelyn refused to leave the site. She wanted to witness patterns in the environment, to capture every subtle cue that might help them understand these beings. Marcus set up additional drones, their cameras hovering high above the dunes, recording from angles impossible for human eyes alone. Through the infrared feed, faint silhouettes appeared again, larger than any human, moving with grace and deliberation. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "They're testing our reaction," she whispered. They're gauging us. And the finger is central to it. The silhouettes moved in a synchronized fashion, forming an almost ceremonial alignment around a particular dune ridge. Evelyn zoomed in with binoculars, noting the angularity of the heads, the elongated limbs, and the cautious steps. The movement was deliberate, ritualistic even, suggesting a level of cognition and social structure far beyond mere survival instinct. Marcus broke the silence. Do you think they understand us? Evelyn shook her head slowly. Not fully, perhaps. But they understand the finger. They understand its importance. And they understand intrusion. She stepped outside briefly, letting the scorching wind hit her face, scanning the horizon for any change in movement. The desert seemed to ripple, the heat creating optical illusions, yet she could feel the presence of enormous beings lurking beyond vision, their awareness extending far beyond the visible. Returning inside the lab, Evelyn checked the pod sensors. Again. The pulsing had intensified slightly, in synchronization with subtle environmental vibrations she could not yet quantify. She realized that the finger was a node, a central hub for communication, memory, and possibly awareness. Marcus, she said, voice taut with excitement and fear, this finger isn't just a relic. It's a memory, a signal, and a test. And it's responding to the desert and to them. Marcus looked uneasy. If they interpret us incorrectly, if they see us as a threat, Evelyn's eyes met his. Then we may not get a second chance. The thought sent a shiver down both their spines. As afternoon turned into evening, Evelyn collected sand and soil samples from around the footprint paths they had identified. She noticed faint impressions in the sediment, large, irregular, but precise depressions, as though the beings had returned to reassert the layout, or perhaps to guide her understanding. The pattern suggested intelligence, spatial awareness, and perhaps even symbolic communication. Every footprint and every depression told a story. Marcus, meanwhile, monitored the drones, which now picked up thermal anomalies at multiple locations. Evelyn examined the data, overlaying it on the terrain. The anomalies formed a network across the desert, faint but unmistakable, almost like energy nodes, feeding information to one another or mapping a hidden topology. She realized that the desert was alive in ways humans could rarely perceive, and the finger acted as a key, a focal point, bridging her consciousness with this hidden system. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the desert darkness pressed in on the lab. Evelyn felt the vibrations again, synchronized with the pulsing of the finger, now more pronounced, almost like a heartbeat. Marcus checked the cameras one final time before the night fully set in. Faint silhouettes emerged again, moving cautiously across the dunes, stopping periodically and aligning with the patterns of earlier movements. Evelyn's mind raced. These beings were deliberate, calculating, aware not just of her presence, but of her intentions, her observations, her very awareness. She realized that this was not a hunt, it was a dialogue, unspoken, subtle, and fraught with danger. They're evaluating our intentions, she whispered. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the infrared settings. And if they decide we're not worthy? Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then we survive or we die trying. But we won't stop observing. This is proof, Marcus. The proof is alive, and it's teaching us. They spent the night monitoring the silhouettes, tracking their movements, and recording the subtle changes in vibrations, thermal readings, and environmental shifts. The finger remained the focal point, pulsing gently yet unmistakably, a rhythm that seemed to coordinate with the beings outside, as if they were communicating with it, or through it, across some imperceptible medium. By the first light of dawn, the silhouettes had retreated, leaving only faint impressions in the sand. Evelyn and Marcus reviewed the footage and sensor data, noting changes in pulse frequency, subtle adjustments in environmental vibrations, and the apparent synchronization between the finger and the desert itself. Evelyn realized with profound clarity that the beings had not left. They had merely withdrawn, continuing their observation from hidden vantage points, their awareness undiminished. The finger had become a bridge, a focal point, and a test of intent. Evelyn knew the next steps would require unparalleled caution, creativity, and understanding. Any misstep could provoke a response with consequences beyond human comprehension. As she prepared new sensor arrays and refined their data collection methods, she understood that the journey had entered a new phase, one in which science, intuition, and survival instincts would be tested simultaneously. Somewhere beyond the dunes, enormous eyes glimmered faintly in the pre-dawn light, and the desert, alive with memory, waited for their next move. The finger pulsed in rhythm with the desert's silent heartbeat, and Evelyn Harper knew, with unshakable certainty, that this was only the beginning of a confrontation and revelation that would redefine humanity's understanding of the world, of history, and of the giants who had walked it long before humans claimed dominion. The morning sun rose over the desert, relentless and brilliant, casting sharp shadows across the dunes, turning the sands into a rippling sea of gold. Evelyn Harper and Marcus Reed were already awake, their routines governed not by the hour, but by the subtle signals they had learned to interpret over the past days, the vibrations in the floor of their mobile lab, the pulsing energy from the mummified finger, and the faint disturbances in the desert that hinted at enormous presences lurking just beyond their vision. The air shimmered with heat, yet beneath the glare, Evelyn could feel the subtle resonance of the finger communicating, guiding, or at least signaling awareness of her presence. Marcus adjusted the mobile lab stabilizers, ensuring that the containment pod holding the finger remained perfectly insulated and immobile. "Evelyn," he said, scanning the surrounding dunes with binoculars, "do you ever feel like we're being tested? Like the desert itself has a consciousness?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She was focused on the data streaming from the environmental sensors, which picked up slight magnetic anomalies, subtle thermal fluctuations, and a low-frequency vibration that seemed impossibly regular, almost musical in cadence. "I don't think it's just the desert," she said finally. "I think it's them. They're aware of us, and they're measuring our intentions, our reactions, everything we do. The finger is not just an artifact. It's a beacon, a bridge, a signal." Marcus swallowed hard. "A beacon to what?" "Giants." Evelyn's lips tightened. "To the beings that created it, preserved it, and protected it across millennia. We're intruders now, and they are evaluating how we respond. One wrong move, Marcus, and this could end badly." The words hung in the thick desert air, and even the wind seemed to pause in anticipation as though listening. Evelyn reviewed the previous night's recordings. The silhouettes they had observed before had disappeared at dawn, leaving only massive footprints and faint impressions in the sand. But the sensor data suggested that the beings had not truly gone, they had simply retreated, perhaps to monitor the mobile lab from hidden vantage points, or to allow the humans a semblance of safety while continuing their observation. The finger pulsed gently, sending vibrations through the containment pod, subtle but undeniable. Evelyn placed her hand on the pod, feeling the rhythm sync almost imperceptibly with her own heartbeat. It was alive, in some sense, and aware. Hours passed, and Evelyn decided to take the fieldwork a step further. She and Marcus would follow the largest of the footprint trails they had documented, cautiously, in the hope of locating a site where the beings had nested or congregated. Every step required careful observation, measuring the sand shifts, noting the curvature of the footprints, and recording anomalies in temperature and electromagnetic readings. The desert was alive with hidden currents, and Evelyn felt a growing awareness of the complexity and intelligence of the ecosystem surrounding the finger. Marcus drove the mobile lab slowly along the dunes, eyes scanning the horizon. "Do you think they'll confront us directly?" he asked, his voice tense. Evelyn shook her head. "Not unless we provoke them. This is a test, a negotiation. Our behavior is being assessed." She adjusted the instruments on the pod, noting subtle increases in the frequency of the vibrations. "The finger is active. It senses something. Perhaps it's even communicating with them, or through them. We need to be careful not to interfere." As the day progressed, Evelyn noticed something peculiar. The patterns of sand ripples and shadows suggested a deliberate arrangement, almost architectural, across certain dunes. She paused, stepping out to inspect the formations. The impressions were too precise to be natural, yet they bore no resemblance to human construction. She photographed, measured, and documented each pattern, realizing that these beings had left markers, or perhaps encoded messages, across the landscape, traces of intelligence spanning centuries. Marcus observed quietly, recording every detail. "It's like they're leaving breadcrumbs," he said. "Or teaching us something." Evelyn nodded. "Or testing our ability to perceive and interpret. Every detail matters. Every vibration, every shadow, every footprint has meaning." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they continued their meticulous exploration. Evelyn collected samples of compressed sand, mineral deposits, and tiny fragments of fossilized vegetation pressed into the footprints. Each sample revealed anomalies, magnetic alignment unlike local geology, isotopic composition suggesting unknown processes, and traces of elements that could withstand extreme heat and pressure. She realized that the beings had mastered a form of environmental manipulation far beyond human comprehension. As dusk approached, the silhouettes returned. This time, they appeared closer, their massive forms partially visible against the shifting sands. Evelyn and Marcus watched in tense silence, careful to maintain the mobile lab's cover. The figures moved deliberately, avoiding direct observation yet remaining aware of every sensor, every camera, every subtle change in the desert. The finger pulsed stronger than ever, a low rhythmic vibration that seemed to emanate from its very core, synchronizing with movements outside. Evelyn whispered, "They know we're here. And they're deciding how to proceed." Marcus exhaled slowly, his hands tight on the equipment. "Are we ready for whatever that might mean?" Evelyn met his gaze, her expression steady despite the fear she felt. "We have to be. Observation is protection. Understanding is survival. And the finger is our guide." Night fell completely, and the desert became a living shadow, the wind carrying whispers that could have been imagination or something more. The silhouettes moved among the dunes, tracing patterns, pausing at specific points, and occasionally orienting themselves toward the finger's location. Evelyn documented everything, noting the changes in pulse frequency, low-frequency vibrations, and shifts in thermal energy. It was a silent dialogue, subtle, intricate, and undeniably intelligent. Hours later, Evelyn and Marcus observed a behavior that stunned them. One of the largest figures approached a dune ridge and extended a limb in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial, aligning its massive form with the moonlit horizon. The finger responded with an intensified pulse, a resonance that Marcus described as audible through the bones. Evelyn realized then that they were witnessing a form of communication, a synchronization between the beings and the artifact. This was not aggression, it was recognition, perhaps even reverence. Evelyn's thoughts raced. If this was true, then the finger was more than a relic. It was a hub of memory, awareness, and connection, bridging species separated by millennia. Marcus whispered, "So we're acknowledged?" Evelyn nodded, though her voice was barely audible. "Yes, but acknowledgement does not mean safety. They are still evaluating, testing our understanding, our behavior, our intentions." They spent the remainder of the night recording every anomaly, every subtle change in the vibrations, the desert patterns, and the finger's responses. By the first light of dawn, the silhouettes had withdrawn, leaving only traces in the sand and an intensified hum from the pod. Evelyn realized that they had completed a cycle of observation, an unspoken communication between the humans, the finger, and the beings themselves. The desert, alive with memory and consciousness, had responded to her presence, and she understood that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would require patience, courage, and insight far beyond what she had imagined when they first uncovered the finger. Somewhere beyond the dunes, massive eyes gleamed faintly, and Evelyn Harper knew, with certainty tempered by awe and fear, that the giants had not retreated. They were waiting, observing, and preparing for the next phase of this silent, monumental dialogue that spanned time, species, and understanding itself. And the finger pulsed gently, a beacon of proof, of history, and of something far greater than humanity had ever dared to imagine. The desert night had receded into a pale dawn, the the first light illuminating endless dunes that seemed to stretch into infinity. Evelyn Harper stood outside the mobile lab, her eyes scanning the horizon, every muscle tense, every nerve attuned to the faintest sign of movement. The mummified finger, still secured in its reinforced pod, pulsed faintly beneath the lab's metallic floor, its vibrations resonating subtly with the sand and air around them. Marcus Reed was setting up the drones for another aerial sweep, their small rotors humming softly against the rising wind. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "do you ever feel like the desert itself is alive? Like it's listening to us?" She didn't answer immediately, focusing instead on the slight undulations in the sand that hinted at patterns far too deliberate to be natural. "It's not just listening," she said finally. "It's responding. The finger has activated something. It's a signal, and everything around it, the sand, the wind, the temperature fluctuations, is a medium of communication. I think they can sense every movement we make, every intention we have." Marcus shivered. "So we're under observation? By what exactly?" Evelyn's gaze never left the dunes. "By them. The beings responsible for this finger. They've survived millennia, hidden, and now they've noticed us. And the finger, they're connected to it. It's both a lure and a bridge." For hours, they moved cautiously across the desert, following faint footprints that stretched like invisible veins across the dunes. Every impression was enormous, far larger than any human, with toes curved to support immense weight and the heel imprint deep enough to suggest a mass that could crush a vehicle. Evelyn documented everything meticulously, using drones, thermal cameras, and environmental sensors, while Marcus recorded the subtle electromagnetic fluctuations that seemed to correlate with the pulse of the finger. "These beings are sophisticated," Evelyn said softly, pausing to examine a footprint with gloved hands. "They aren't mindless. They're calculating, communicating, perhaps even teaching us how to perceive their world. And the finger is central to that process." Marcus frowned, glancing nervously at the horizon. "You mean they expect us to understand? Or they expect us to obey?" Evelyn shook her head. "I don't know. But I know one thing. Any misstep could provoke a reaction we aren't prepared for. Observation is our only tool right now. Patience is our survival." As they progressed, the desert shifted subtly. Shadows deepened unnaturally, the wind changed direction in patterns that suggested deliberate manipulation, and faint vibrations could be felt through the soles of their boots. Evelyn adjusted her instruments, calibrating for the fluctuations, realizing that the desert itself was being used as a medium of communication. She felt the pulse of the finger grow stronger, synchronized with the tremors in the sand. "It's guiding them," she whispered. "Or signaling them. Or both." By afternoon, they reached a plateau overlooking a series of dunes where the patterns of footprints suggested congregation. The impressions were older, partially eroded, yet unmistakable, an enormous gathering place, a site of ritual, or perhaps a center of observation. Evelyn crouched, brushing sand from one of the largest prints. "This is centuries old," she murmured. "These beings have maintained presence here for generations. The finger may have been moved, but its influence remains." Marcus adjusted the drones to hover above the plateau. Through the thermal cameras, they detected faint signatures, huge forms moving slowly, careful to remain hidden, aligning with older patterns in the sand. Evelyn's heart raced. "They're here," she said, barely audible. "Watching. Calculating." As night fell, the silhouettes approached the plateau, massive shapes outlined against the starlit sky. Evelyn observed with binoculars, noting elongated limbs, angular heads, and movements that were deliberate yet cautious. The pulse from the finger intensified, low-frequency vibrations now almost palpable, syncing with subtle changes in wind and temperature. Marcus muttered under his breath, "It's like they're communicating with it or through it." Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the massive forms. "They are. And they're testing us. Each gesture, each pause, each alignment with the stars is a signal. We are participants in a dialogue we barely understand." Hours passed, and Evelyn recorded every anomaly, shifts in electromagnetic fields, variations in thermal signatures, faint musical harmonics in low-frequency vibrations. and subtle chemical traces in the sand that suggested environmental manipulation. The beings were intelligent, deliberate, and highly aware of the humans and the finger. Suddenly, one of the silhouettes moved closer to the edge of the plateau. Evelyn observed it carefully. It crouched, extended a massive limb, and touched the sand lightly. The finger pulsed in immediate response, a vibration that seemed to communicate recognition, or perhaps acknowledgement. Marcus glanced at her, awestruck. "Do you think they're aware of us? Of everything we're doing?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. "They are. And the finger is both the link and the interpreter. It's responding to them as much as we are responding to it." The desert around them seemed to hum with energy, subtle yet undeniable. Shadows danced across dunes in impossible patterns, the wind shifted unnaturally, and faint vibrations traveled through the sand, echoing the pulsing of the finger. Evelyn realized that she had entered a dialogue not just with the beings, but with the desert itself, mediated by the finger. She documented every observation with precision, the timing of the pulses, the alignment of the silhouettes with celestial markers, the correlation between the finger's resonance and environmental changes. It was a communication network spanning biology, geology, and possibly dimensions beyond human perception. Hours later, the silhouettes retreated slowly, moving with deliberate caution toward the dunes beyond the plateau. Evelyn and Marcus followed at a safe distance, careful not to provoke a reaction. She noted the retreat patterns, the pauses, and the occasional alignment of the figures with older footprints and sand impressions. It was a silent, intricate ritual, and she sensed that they were conveying lessons as much as issuing warnings. By the early morning light, the silhouettes had disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving traces in the sand and a faint, lingering hum that resonated through the mobile lab. Evelyn exhaled, exhausted but exhilarated. "We've been observed, assessed, and acknowledged," she said softly. Marcus, still staring at the horizon, whispered, "Acknowledged, but what does that mean for us?" Evelyn shook her head, her mind racing with possibilities. "It means we are now participants in their world, whether we want to be or not. Every action we take, every observation we record, every decision we make is being weighed. And the finger, it's our link, our guide, and our warning." They spent the next hours consolidating data, recalibrating sensors, and preparing for further fieldwork. Evelyn realized with a profound mixture of fear and awe that the finger had not only revealed proof of giants long thought mythical, but had also established a network of awareness, communication, and guardianship that stretched across the desert. Somewhere, beyond the dunes, enormous eyes gleamed faintly, watching, waiting, evaluating. Evelyn Harper understood that the journey ahead would demand courage, intellect, and intuition far beyond anything she had faced before. The finger pulsed gently, a constant reminder that proof was not passive. It was alive, aware, and ready to respond to every human action. And in that moment, Evelyn knew that she had crossed a threshold into a world where myth and reality converged, where survival required. Understanding the language of giants, and where the desert itself was an active participant in the story that had only just begun. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the early morning sun, every dune casting long, sharp shadows that shifted with the subtle angles of light. Evelyn Harper stood on a ridge, her eyes scanning the horizon, attuned to every detail, every hint of movement. The mummified finger, secured in its reinforced pod, pulsed faintly beneath the floor of the mobile lab, its rhythm almost imperceptible yet unmistakable to Evelyn's trained senses. Marcus readjusted the drones overhead, their quiet hum merging with the whisper of the wind across the dunes. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I can't shake the feeling that we're being followed, that the desert itself is watching us." Evelyn didn't reply immediately. Her gaze was fixed on a series of subtle indentations in the sand that formed a pattern unlike any natural formation she had ever observed. "It's not just watching," she said finally. "It's responding. And it's not the desert alone, it's them. The finger has awakened a network, a consciousness that senses every motion, every thought, and every intention we project." Marcus exhaled slowly, unease clear in his expression. "So we're trespassing into a world that isn't ours. And they know it." Evelyn nodded, scanning the horizon where the sand met jagged cliffs in the distance. We are intruders now. The beings that preserve this finger are aware of our presence. They are intelligent, deliberate, and patient. And the finger, they are connected to it. It's both a key and a bridge. For hours, they moved cautiously across the dunes, following the largest and deepest footprints they had documented days before. Each impression was enormous, with curved toes designed to bear immense weight, and heels pressed deep into the sand, suggesting a mass that could flatten vehicles. Evelyn measured and photographed every detail, while Marcus recorded environmental fluctuations, subtle magnetic anomalies, shifts in thermal readings, and faint vibrations in the ground that seemed almost musical. These beings are not mindless, Evelyn whispered. They are calculating, observing, and perhaps teaching us how to perceive their world. The finger is central to that process. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. You mean they want us to understand? Or obey? Evelyn paused, crouching beside a massive footprint partially filled with wind-blown sand. I don't know, but I know that every misstep could provoke a response we cannot survive. Observation is our only tool. Patience is our protection. The afternoon sun scorched the desert as they carefully traced the path of footprints, noting patterns in the sand that were irregular yet deliberate, suggesting ritual or symbolic communication. Evelyn collected sand and mineral samples from each footprint, discovering isotopic anomalies and traces of elements that resisted extreme heat, erosion, and time. She realized that these beings had mastered a form of environmental manipulation far beyond human comprehension, encoding messages and instructions into the very earth they walked upon. As dusk approached, the silhouettes reappeared. The massive forms moved cautiously, avoiding direct detection yet remaining acutely aware of the humans and the finger. Evelyn watched with binoculars, noting elongated limbs, angular heads, and coordinated movement that suggested a hierarchy and deliberate communication. The finger pulsed in rhythm with the being's gestures, sending low-frequency vibrations that resonated through the lab floor and into Evelyn's chest. Marcus whispered, "It's like they're talking with it or through it." Evelyn nodded. Yes, they're testing us, and the finger is the medium. Every alignment with the stars, every pause, every shift in movement is a signal. We are participants in a dialogue we barely comprehend. Hours passed in tense silence. Evelyn documented every anomaly, variations in electromagnetic fields, thermal shifts, low-frequency vibrations, and faint chemical traces in the sand. The beings were intelligent, aware, and deliberate, their actions both a communication and a challenge. Then, one of the largest silhouettes approached the edge of a dune and extended a massive limb in a gesture that was almost ceremonial. The finger pulsed in immediate response, a vibration that reverberated through the lab. Evelyn realized this was not aggression but acknowledgement, a form of recognition that transcended human language. Marcus, awestruck, whispered, "So they see us?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. Yes, but recognition does not guarantee safety. They're evaluating, and we must continue to observe with precision and respect. The desert seemed alive, the wind carrying subtle vibrations and shifting sands in patterns that mirrored the fingers pulsing. Evelyn documented every observation, noting the timing of movements, the alignment of the silhouettes with celestial markers, and the correlation between the finger's resonance and environmental changes. This was a network of communication that spanned biology, geology, and possibly dimensions beyond human perception. Hours later, the silhouettes retreated, moving with caution across the dunes. Evelyn and Marcus followed at a safe distance, analyzing the retreat patterns and pauses, recognizing an unspoken ritual, a series of lessons and warnings encoded in motion. By the first light of dawn, the silhouettes had vanished, leaving only faint impressions in the sand and a lingering hum resonating from the pod. Evelyn exhaled, her body exhausted, but her mind alert and exhilarated. They have observed and assessed us. They have acknowledged us. But this is only the beginning. Marcus, staring at the horizon, whispered, "Acknowledged, but what does that mean for us?" Evelyn shook her head, her thoughts racing. It means we are now participants in a world that has existed far longer than humanity. Every action, every observation, every decision is being weighed. The finger is our link, our guide, and our warning. They spent the morning consolidating data, recalibrating sensors, and preparing for further exploration. Evelyn understood that the finger had not only revealed proof of giants thought mythical, but had established a network of awareness and guardianship that spanned the desert. Somewhere beyond the dunes, massive eyes gleamed faintly, watching, evaluating, and waiting. The pulse of the finger reminded her that proof was not passive. It was alive, aware, and responsive. Evelyn Harper knew that she had crossed a threshold into a world where myth and reality converged, where survival demanded understanding the language of giants, and where the desert itself had become an active participant in a story that was far from over. The finger pulsed gently, a constant beacon, signaling that the next chapter, fraught with peril, revelation, and wonder, was only just beginning. The desert sun rose mercilessly, burning the horizon into waves of shimmering gold that made the dunes appear alive, as if breathing in tandem with the hidden giants beyond human perception. Evelyn Harper adjusted the sensors on the mobile lab, noting the subtle fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, thermal readings, and low-frequency vibrations that pulsed through the reinforced floor beneath the containment pod. The mummified finger, still cocooned in its insulated chamber, pulsed faintly, its rhythm almost imperceptible yet profoundly present to Evelyn. Marcus Reed hovered over the drone monitors, his fingers tracing flight paths while his eyes scanned for any movement in the dunes. "I swear," he muttered, voice tense, "that the desert itself has a mind. Every ripple, every shadow, it's like it knows we're here." Evelyn didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on a series of subtle indentations in the sand, faint lines that formed patterns she could not yet interpret. "It's not just the desert," she said finally. "It's them. The finger has activated something, an intelligence woven into the land, into the wind, into the very sand beneath our feet. They sense us, and we are being evaluated." Marcus swallowed, anxiety written across his face. "So we're being observed? By giants?" Evelyn nodded, her eyes narrowing at a ridge in the distance where shadows shifted unnaturally. "Yes, and the finger is their conduit. It's both a bridge and a signal. We're participants in a network we don't fully understand. One wrong move and we could trigger consequences beyond anything we've prepared for." They moved cautiously, tracing the largest footprints yet recorded, each step calculated to avoid unnecessary disturbance. The prints were enormous, with elongated toes and deep heel impressions suggesting weight far beyond any human norm. Evelyn photographed, measured, and analyzed each footprint, while Marcus recorded subtle environmental changes, electromagnetic anomalies, thermal deviations, and low-frequency vibrations that synchronized with the pulsing of the finger. "These beings are intelligent," Evelyn murmured. "Every step, every pause, every alignment in their movement is deliberate. They are communicating through the landscape, through vibration, through the air. And the finger, they are attuned to it. Central to their understanding." Marcus shuddered. "Do they want us to understand them? Or are they testing us?" Evelyn crouched beside a footprint partially filled with wind-blown sand. "Perhaps both. And any misinterpretation could be catastrophic. Our survival depends on observation, patience, and respect." As the afternoon sun scorched the desert, they observed subtle patterns, ridges and depressions that seemed deliberately arranged, almost architectural, yet entirely alien. Evelyn collected samples, noting isotopic anomalies and traces of elements resistant to erosion, heat, and decay. She realized that the beings had mastered manipulation of their environment, encoding messages into the very earth, leaving lessons or warnings that only an attuned observer could decipher. As dusk approached, the silhouettes reappeared, enormous and cautious, avoiding direct exposure yet demonstrating a clear awareness of the humans and the finger. Evelyn watched, binoculars in hand, noting elongated limbs, angular heads, and deliberate, coordinated movements that suggested hierarchy and intelligence. The finger pulsed stronger, low-frequency vibrations now resonating through the lab and into Evelyn's chest. Marcus whispered, "It's like they're talking through it." Evelyn nodded. "They're testing us. Every gesture, every pause, every celestial alignment is communication. We are participants in a dialogue we barely understand." Hours passed. Evelyn recorded every anomaly: electromagnetic shifts, thermal fluctuations, low-frequency harmonics, and faint chemical traces in the sand. The being's behavior demonstrated intelligence, awareness, and deliberation. Their every action a mixture of observation, caution, and instruction. Suddenly, one of the largest figures approached the edge of a dune, extending a massive limb in what appeared to be a ceremonial gesture. The finger pulsed immediately, a vibration that reverberated through the mobile lab. Evelyn realized this was recognition, acknowledgement that transcended human understanding. Marcus, wide-eyed, whispered, "So they see us?" Evelyn exhaled, her chest tight with awe. "Yes, but recognition does not equal safety. They are evaluating. Observation is our shield, understanding our survival." The desert hummed with unseen energy, sand rippling in patterns that mirrored the fingers pulsing, wind carrying subtle vibrations. Evelyn documented every movement, noting timing, alignment with stars, and the correlation between the finger and environmental cues. This network of communication spanned biology, geology, and possibly dimensions beyond human perception. Hours later, the silhouettes began to retreat, moving deliberately across the dunes. Evelyn and Marcus followed at a safe distance, noting retreat patterns, pauses, and alignments, silent lessons encoded in motion. By first light, the silhouettes had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving faint impressions and a lingering hum from the pod. Evelyn exhaled, exhausted yet exhilarated. They've observed, assessed, and acknowledged us. But this is just the beginning. Marcus, staring at the horizon, murmured, "Acknowledged, what does that mean?" Evelyn shook her head, mind racing. "It means we are participants in a world that predates humanity. Every action, every observation, every choice is being weighed. The finger is our link, our guide, and our warning." They consolidated data, recalibrated sensors, and prepared for further exploration. Evelyn realized that the finger had not only revealed proof of giants thought mythical, but also established a network of awareness and guardianship spanning the desert. Somewhere beyond the dunes, massive eyes gleamed faintly, observing, evaluating, waiting. The finger pulsed, alive and responsive, signaling that the next chapter, full of peril, revelation, and wonder, was about to unfold. Evelyn Harper understood that myth and reality had converged, that survival demanded understanding the language of giants, and that the desert itself had become an active participant in a story only beginning to be told. The desert night descended like a velvet shroud, deepening shadows across the dunes and painting the landscape in surreal shades of gray and black. Evelyn Harper stood beside the mobile lab, her eyes scanning the horizon for the slightest movement, the faintest ripple in the sand, the subtle quiver of wind that might betray the presence of the giants. The mummified finger pulsed softly beneath the lab floor, a slow, rhythmic vibration that seemed almost alive, a heartbeat syncing with the desert itself. Marcus Reed hovered near the drone monitors, fingers poised over controls, the hum of the machines blending with the whisper of the wind. "Evelyn," he muttered, voice taut with tension, "I swear every time I look at those dunes, I feel like they're watching us right now. Not just the silhouettes, but the desert itself." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Her eyes followed a faint pattern in the sand, subtle depressions that formed lines she could not yet decode. She knelt, brushing away loose sand to reveal the full extent of the impressions. "It's not just the desert," she said finally, voice low. "It's them. The finger has awakened something. An intelligence woven into the land, into the air, into the sand. They sense our every step, our every intention. And the finger, it's the conduit." Marcus swallowed, unease clear on his face. "So the giants know we're here? And they're watching every move?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, and the finger is central. It bridges us to them, or perhaps to their memory, their awareness. Any wrong move could be catastrophic. Observation is our only defense. Patience is our protection." They began moving along the dune ridges cautiously, tracing the largest footprints recorded, each step calculated not to disturb the sand more than necessary. The prints were massive, the toes elongated, the heel impressions deep, suggesting creatures of extraordinary mass and strength. Evelyn documented every detail, while Marcus logged environmental anomalies, subtle magnetic fluctuations, thermal deviations, and low-frequency vibrations in the sand that synchronized with the finger's pulse. "These beings are intelligent," Evelyn whispered. "Every step, pause, and alignment in their movement is deliberate. They are communicating through the terrain, through vibration, through air. And the finger, they are attuned to it. Everything revolves around it." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "Do they want us to understand? Or are they testing us?" Evelyn crouched beside a print, partially filled with wind-blown sand. "Perhaps both. And any misstep could provoke a response we cannot survive. Patience and precise observation are our only means of survival." As dusk approached, patterns emerged in the dunes, ridges and depressions arranged in a manner too precise to be natural, almost architectural, yet entirely alien. Evelyn collected sand and mineral samples, noting isotopic anomalies and traces of elements that resisted erosion, heat, and decay. She realized these beings had mastered manipulation of their environment, leaving lessons encoded in the land itself. When night fell, the silhouettes returned. Massive shapes moved with caution, avoiding direct exposure but demonstrating awareness of the humans and the finger. Evelyn observed with binoculars, elongated limbs, angular heads, deliberate, coordinated movements suggesting hierarchy and intelligence. The finger pulsed stronger, vibrations now tangible through the lab floor and into Evelyn's chest. Marcus whispered, "It's like they're talking through it." Evelyn nodded. "Yes, they're testing us. Every gesture, pause, and alignment is communication. We are participants in a dialogue beyond human comprehension." Hours passed. Evelyn documented every anomaly: electromagnetic shifts, thermal fluctuations, low-frequency harmonics, faint chemical traces in the sand. The beings were intelligent, aware, and deliberate. Then, one massive silhouette approached the edge of a dune and extended a limb in what seemed a ceremonial gesture. The finger pulsed immediately, reverberating through the mobile lab. Evelyn realized this was acknowledgement, recognition that transcended human understanding. Marcus, wide-eyed, whispered, "They see us, really see us." Evelyn exhaled, chest tight with awe. "Yes, but acknowledgement does not guarantee safety. They are evaluating. Observation is our shield, understanding is our survival." The desert hummed with unseen energy, sand rippled, wind shifted, vibrations mirrored the fingers pulsing. Evelyn documented every detail: movement timing, celestial alignment, correlation between finger and environmental cues. This communication network spanned biology, geology, and possibly dimensions beyond human perception. Later, the silhouettes began a deliberate retreat across the dunes. Evelyn and Marcus followed cautiously, noting retreat patterns, pauses, and alignments, an unspoken ritual, a series of lessons encoded in motion. By dawn, the silhouettes had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving faint impressions and a lingering hum from the pod. Evelyn exhaled, exhausted but exhilarated. "They have observed, assessed, and acknowledged us. But this is just the beginning." Marcus, staring at the horizon, murmured, "Acknowledged, but what does that mean for us?" Evelyn shook her head, mind racing. "It means we are now participants in a world predating humanity. Every action, every observation, every decision is weighed. The finger is our link, our guide, and our warning." They spent the morning consolidating data, recalibrating sensors, and preparing for further exploration. Evelyn realized the finger had not only revealed proof of giants thought mythical, but also established a network of awareness and guardianship spanning the desert. Somewhere beyond the dunes, massive eyes gleamed faintly, watching, evaluating, waiting. The finger pulsed, alive and responsive, signaling that the next chapter, fraught with peril, revelation, and wonder, was about to unfold. Evelyn Harper understood that myth and reality had converged. Survival demanded understanding the language of giants, and the desert itself had become an active participant in a story only beginning to be told. As she touched the pod lightly, feeling the faint pulse, she sensed a message, or perhaps a challenge, embedded in the rhythm. Somewhere out there, beyond vision, the giants were waiting, testing, and guiding. The journey ahead was no longer just about proof. It was about dialogue, survival, and understanding the consciousness of beings humanity had long considered legend. Evelyn knew, with a mixture of awe and dread, that the desert, the finger, and the giants were intertwined in a network of perception and awareness that would demand every ounce of her intellect, courage, and intuition. And in that moment, she realized the true scope of the mission: to survive, to understand, and to witness the interface between myth and reality in a world that had existed long before humans dared to question it. The dawn light fractured across the endless dunes like shards of crystal, casting long shadows that moved subtly as the desert itself seemed to shift beneath an invisible force. Evelyn Harper stood atop a ridge, feeling the pulse of the mummified finger through the reinforced pod beneath her fingertips. Each vibration was a language she could almost understand, a cadence that resonated with the rhythm of the desert, as if the very land itself were alive and aware. Marcus Reed hovered nearby, adjusting the drone feeds, his eyes reflecting equal measures of awe and fear. "Evelyn," he whispered, I think they're aware of everything. Not just us, but our thoughts, our intentions, our hesitation." Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on a series of subtle impressions in the sand far below, a network of footprints, depressions, and lines that were impossibly deliberate. She traced the patterns with her mind, trying to decipher the silent logic, the code embedded by beings whose scale and intelligence dwarfed human comprehension. "It's more than awareness," she said quietly. "It's a network, a consciousness. And the finger is the node, the hub of connection. Every pulse, every vibration, every shift in temperature is a message we're only beginning to interpret." They descended the ridge, stepping carefully across the dunes, following footprints that led toward a valley where the sand was compressed in unnatural geometric shapes. Evelyn collected samples, sand, minerals, faint traces of unknown compounds, and recorded every subtle change in electromagnetic readings, thermal fluctuations, and the low-frequency hum that now seemed constant beneath the pod. Marcus studied the drone's thermal feeds and pointed. "Do you see that? They're moving again. And they're organized." Evelyn adjusted her binoculars. Several massive silhouettes emerged from behind a ridge, moving with deliberate coordination. Their limbs were elongated, heads angular, and movements measured with a precision that suggested a social hierarchy and deliberate intent. They paused periodically, aligning with faint celestial markers and the contours of the land. Evelyn felt the finger pulse in perfect synchrony, a low resonance that vibrated not only through the lab floor but through her chest. "It's a dialogue," she whispered. "A dialogue through motion, vibration, and the environment itself. And we are participants." Marcus swallowed. "Participants or subjects?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She crouched to measure the impressions they left, noting subtle overlaps in movement patterns that suggested both instruction and observation. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "We exist within their perception now. How we act, how we observe, what we record, it all contributes to their understanding of us. The finger is the intermediary." The silhouettes paused near a particularly large dune, the sand compressed into a circular formation, geometric and impossibly precise. One of the figures extended a massive limb toward the center, and the finger pulsed sharply in response. Evelyn felt the vibration travel through her body like a surge of electricity. Marcus muttered, "It's acknowledgement. Recognition." Evelyn nodded, though a shiver ran down her spine. "Yes, but it's more than that. It's a test. They're evaluating our intentions, our understanding, and perhaps our worthiness." Night fell, and the desert became a tapestry of shadows and subtle motion. The silhouettes moved among the dunes, communicating through gestures and pauses that synchronized with the fingers pulsing. Evelyn documented every anomaly, shifts in electromagnetic fields, variations in thermal signatures, subtle vibrations, and faint chemical traces left in the sand. It was a silent, intricate dialogue that transcended language, a network linking the finger, the giants, and the desert itself. Hours passed, and Evelyn realized that the beings were teaching as much as observing. Each movement, each alignment with the stars, each interaction with the environment was a lesson encoded in behavior. The finger's pulse intensified with each action, guiding her attention, focusing her perception. Marcus observed, almost breathless. They're showing us something. Or preparing us for something. Evelyn's heart pounded. Yes, and we must pay attention. Every detail, every pattern, every resonance is crucial. Misinterpretation could be fatal. Suddenly, one of the largest silhouettes stepped forward, kneeling in the sand, its enormous hand hovering above a depression. The finger pulsed violently, sending a vibration through the lab, through Evelyn's body, through the desert itself. She felt a sense of recognition, of connection, an almost spiritual acknowledgement that the artifact, the beings, and she were part of an interlinked awareness spanning millennia. It's communication, she whispered. Or communion. Hours later, as the silhouettes retreated silently into the dunes, Evelyn and Marcus followed cautiously, noting the patterns, pauses, and alignments, the lessons and warnings embedded in each motion. By dawn, the giants had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving only traces in the sand and a residual hum from the pod, a lingering pulse that seemed to hold the memory of the night. Evelyn exhaled, exhausted but exhilarated. They have acknowledged us, she said, but this is only the beginning. We are now part of something far larger than ourselves, a network of perception that spans species, time, and the very fabric of the desert. Marcus, voice barely audible, asked, "So what now?" Evelyn looked out across the dunes, eyes fixed on the horizon. Now we watch, we learn, and we survive. And the finger will guide us. Whatever comes next, it will demand courage, intellect, and intuition beyond anything we've faced. This is the threshold. Beyond it we cannot predict. But one thing is certain, proof is not passive. It is alive. It is aware. And it will respond to us. The desert shimmered beneath the rising sun, alive with memory, consciousness, and unseen eyes. Evelyn Harper felt the pulse of the finger, syncing with the rhythm of the land, and knew with absolute clarity that humanity had crossed into a world where myth and reality converged. The giants were real. They were aware. And the proof of their existence was waiting not just to be observed, but to be understood. Somewhere beyond the dunes, massive eyes glimmered faintly, observing, evaluating, teaching, and waiting for the next step. Evelyn and Marcus stood in silence, their minds stretched to the limits of comprehension, the pulse of the finger connecting them to a network older than human civilization, a bridge across time, species, and consciousness. The journey had reached its climax, yet the story was far from over. The desert, the giants, and the finger held secrets that would redefine humanity's understanding of history, of life, and of the boundaries between myth and reality. Evelyn Harper, hand resting lightly on the pod, felt the pulse surge once more, steady and insistent, and realized that the next chapter of discovery, revelation, and survival was beginning now, in a dialogue without words, a connection that transcended everything she had known. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light across the living sands, Evelyn understood that she and Marcus had become part of a story that had been unfolding for millennia, a story of giants, memory, and proof that was alive, aware, and waiting.